table to join Toothless. That's enough. Though the headache pulsed from exhaustion and the noise and Toothless' sonic roar, he forced himself to speak softly. Yelling would only raise everyone's blood pressure again. Everyone needed to calm down. He set a calming hand on Toothless' warm nose, the scales vibrating beneath his palm. I understand why everyone is upset and afraid. I am too. Hiccup glared at Ali and Gray. But panicking is only going to make us more vulnerable. What would you have us do then? Yue said. We can't just wait for the slave trade to come to us, Hiccup. I won't have my son's legacy destroyed, my village plundered and torn asunder because of their plotting. I won't have it. Hiccup met Leaf's eyes briefly, and though the young man's eyes had shone with pride yesterday, now they were tinged with a bit of fear. Like Sokka and Tolem's. And Finn's. Nor will I, Hiccup said firmly. We all have a choice in how our villages are run. If you two want to run your villages in such a way, he said to Gray and Ali. Fine. There's nothing we can do to stop you. But mark my words, if you force the slave trade on us, if you encourage them to come to our lands and force us to comply, it will be considered an act of war. Despite the fact that many innocent lives will be lost, I will not sit by and let you dictate to me what will happen to my village. I swore an oath to protect my people, and by the gods, I will do whatever it takes to do so. Despite the cries of agreement from the allies gathered, his friends, Ali smirked. Do you honestly think you can win a war against the slave trade? You're outnumbered. Not if we stand together. Hiccup said, meeting each of the other chieftains' eyes. Kara and Sven, Sokka and Tolem and Louis, Yue and his son, Leaf, Kamikaze and Ivan and Jade and Millie. And last, but certainly not least, he looked at Finn, who'd stopped fighting Snotlout at last and looked up at him with such bleak, pain-filled eyes. Each of our villages is strong and mighty in its own right. But together, we are the allied tribes of the archipelago. Together we decide what rules apply to our villages. And when there's a crisis, we stand together to defend those that need it. And Hiccup turned and faced Ali and Gray, his voice hardening as he let some of that rage loose at last. We also decide together when to cut ties with those that push us too far. The whole grew quiet, a collective intake of breath. Gray's face went slack. You'd vote to have us pushed out. What's the matter, Gray? Hiccup asked in a low voice. Not confident in your business arrangements with your new friends? The idea seemed to bother Ali less than Gray, though her expression turned frosty. Both of you can do what you feel is right for your villages, Hiccup said. But I'm warning you on behalf of all the allied tribes, if we sense any sort of plotting against another village, it will be dealt with swiftly and without recourse. Your seat at this table will be revoked and your village will be cut off from the allied tribes. It took a few moments worth of silence, but Gray eventually dipped his chin in a reluctant nod, as Hiccup knew he would. Gray had always been a coward and a sluggard, he'd never had the motivation to see the tough times through to the end. Instant gratification was his motto and greed his poison. A little fear perhaps could keep him at bay for now. But Ali, she stared up at him with a bored, almost nonplussed expression. She'd be harder to convince. Fear would be her ally, not a deterrent. After all, she had very little to lose and so much to gain. Brandine, who'd remained silent throughout the entire argument, flicked his eyes up to Hiccup with a look of amusement. Daring him to speak, to bring him into the conversation. Indeed, Hiccup briefly wondered where he stood in all this. But he didn't dare broach the topic or give it an inch of thought. With their luck, he'd use it to make the claim on Darren's parentage. And after this new curveball, Hiccup didn't think he could handle that sort of torture. When the Great Hall finally dismissed for lunch, Inga thought everyone looked rather tense. The meeting had run longer than usual, which only increased her anxiety. All she wanted to do was grab some food and go down to the docks to talk to her kinda sorta ex-best friend. Was that so much to ask? She refrained from asking anyone how the meetings went, seeing as her cluster of friends looked rather anxious and downtrodden. She did stop however to ask Finn how his bandages were holding up, to which he replied smashingly. Unsure how to respond, she'd merely patted his shoulder and told him to come tomorrow if he needed anything. Eric had barely spared her a glance as he inhaled his bowl of stew, looking for all the world like the roof was about to crash in on them. She withheld the joke for Finn's sake. Her blonde friend did explain he needed to go see Adriana and the baby though, and without another word, he'd left the table. Only Genevieve seemed to notice her curious expression, advising that the meeting was cutthroat and iconically Viking. Sounds riveting, Inga had said before excusing herself to the buffet line where she'd eagerly stuffed 2 lunch sacks with roast beef and goat cheese sandwiches, carrot sticks and brownies. She quickly left the great hall and mounted her beloved Misty, whose red wings shimmered in the early afternoon sunlight. Dark clouds gathered along the horizon. As they flew down the cliff to the docks, she briefly wondered if it would rain later. Misty landed alongside Johann's ship and she dismounted. Alton. Johann popped up from behind a row of barrels. Hello there, lassie. Looking for Alton, you say? Yes. Is he here? He's below decks. I'll call him. No, that's okay, Johann, Inga said, boarding the ship and walking to the nearest stairs that led down into the belly of the ship. I'll find him. Thanks. All right then. Be careful, there are many dangerous tools and things down there. Lunch sacks under an arm, Inga descended into the darkness. She felt a sudden wave of nerves that had nothing to do with the ship or the dim darkness. She'd been so rotten to Alton before, when he'd endured her pining for Finn for so long, not to mention he'd helped her when she could have died. And she'd thrown it in his face. She reached the end of the ladder and looked up and down the halls. She heard a series of rummaging to her left and followed the sound, careful not to trip over boxes stacked in corners or a large coil of rope that had flopped onto the floor. Inga stepped into a large room filled with hundreds of boxes and tables covered in wares and bric-a-brac of varying kinds. Glass baubles, pottery and clay dishes, hunting tools, dolls and books and writing utensils, and weapons. Weapons, everywhere of varying styles and metals and crafted with whorls and precious metals that she knew weren't of Viking make. Alton. A small crash sounded from the back of the room, followed by a yelp. Then he appeared between a row of boxes, shaking a hand. Inga. What are you doing here? Inga swallowed and lifted a bag. I heard you've been here since the wee hours of the morning. I thought you'd be hungry. His brown eyes narrowed in confusion. Yeah. Thanks. Inga approached, picking her way through the tables. She had a hard time meeting his eyes when he took one of the bags. You didn't have to do this. Alton said. He didn't look inside the bag, but instead kept his eyes on her. As if trying to get a read on her. Swallowing hard, Inga at last met his eyes. Call it a peace offering. His expression turned guarded and his eyes dropped at last. He said nothing and they stood in silence for what felt like the longest time. It occurred to her that this was her moment to speak. She'd better not squander it. You were right, you know, she said, twisting her long braid beneath her hands. I've liked him for so long that I became obsessed and, that's not healthy. I should have let him go when he first turned me down. And I thought if I tried harder then it would all work out, but, it wasn't fair to me and it wasn't fair to him. Inga swallowed and dared a cautious look up at him. And it wasn't fair to you either, especially when you had the decency to be honest and tell me to my face that I was full of crap. I never said that, Alton said sharply. Stubborn maybe. That's what I mean though. Because I didn't get what I wanted, I was mad and took it out on you. And when I should have been thanking you for helping me not die, I kicked you to the curb. Inga straightened and although it hurt, although it was insanely difficult to admit it, she said the words that needed to be said. I was wrong and I hurt my friend. I'm sorry. Can. A knot formed in her throat and she fought to speak around it. Can you forgive me? There it was. She'd said it. And even if he kicked her out like she deserved for being such a terrible person, even if he never spoke to her again, that was his choice. The ball was in his court, she'd done her part. And though he still looked hurt, like he wanted to hold on to his anger, his expression slowly cleared. He looked at his shoes and swallowed hard, the paper bag in his hand crinkling in the silence. I'm sorry too. Alton said finally. He looked up at her nervously. The last thing I should have done was tell you, that I like you. Though his cheeks turned a slight shade of pink, he quickly added, it was bad timing and... I don't know what I expected, like you were going to get over Finn right away and like me back or something. It was stupid and immature. Her braid probably looked like a mess from her endless twisting. About that. Inga's heart thundered. I can't. I don't. Alton's eyes shuttered. Inga, you don't have to say anything about. Yes I do, because I want you to understand. Inga said, feeling a pulse of that old stubbornness. He couldn't force her to just leave it alone, not if she wanted to talk about it. Your feelings matter, too. I don't like you like that, but maybe. She shook her head. She didn't want to give him false hope for the future. I won't speak for the future, but I will say this, I want my best friend back and I care about you enough to not make you a rebound. And though Alton looked slightly disappointed, he nodded with understanding. So, in essence, I'd like to be friends again. Like we used to be. Alton snorted, finally cracking a smile. In essence. You sound like Johan summarizing a documentary. Inga's hands slapped to her sides in an exaggerated shrug. Well, I'm trying to be as clear and concise as possible without making this more awkward than it is. I thought you'd appreciate that. I do, Alton said. He took a deep breath and let it go before meeting her eyes. Yes. Inga blinked in confusion. Yes, what? Yes, I forgive you. Yes, I want to be friends like we used to be. And. He faltered, a bit of fear shining in his eyes. Then he shook his head. Never mind. Yes. I think it's time we moved past all of this. Inga briefly wondered what it was he was going to say but decided not to ask or insist he spill the beans. Because if he thought it wiser not to say, then maybe that was for the best. Still, that cursed temptress curiosity. Ignoring that annoying tap on the shoulder, Inga stepped closer and pulled him into a hug. He was so tall compared to her, his long arms coming around her and squeezing tight. His shirt smelled like leather and sea salt. Despite herself, her eyes burned with tears. I missed you, she whispered. Alton pulled back and tugged on her very messy braid. Me too. Now, he said with a flair of dramatics like he always used to, and yanked open the paper bag. Sandwich, brownie, and... He scowled and plunged his hand into the bag, pulling out the carrot sticks. What are these? Inga internally winced. She'd forgotten that he hated vegetables. Carrots. Don't give me that look, they're good for you. He sighed and hopped onto the nearest table, then snapped one long carrot in half. They're abhorrent. They're hard and crunchy and you can't hear anyone talk while you're chewing. They're good for your eyes and digestion. Assistant to the healer, and suddenly she knows everything. Inga clicked her tongue and hopped up beside him before digging her sandwich out of the bag. You'll find every excuse in the book not to eat healthy. There's a book on excuses. I need one. Also, I prefer to enjoy life. Which you can do better by eating healthier things. Inga said matter-of-factly. Root vegetables and fruits help your body to work prop. What are you doing? Alton fought to keep the carrots lodged in his upper lip but failed miserably when he laughed. I'm a walrus. Kids love it. Walruses? Inga asked dryly. You're not supposed to suck on them. I'm not sucking on them, Alton said, sticking them back in his lip and grinning toothily at her. Gee. I'm a walrus. Inga sighed. Maybe I'll rescind that friendship after all. Now you can't, Alton smirked. He threw the carrots into the bag and withdrew the brownie. Someone has to keep an eye on things around here. True that. Inga tried and failed for the third time to take a bite out of her sandwich. She watched as he nearly ate the entire brownie in one go. Dessert first, too. Alton shrugged and swallowed. As Kurt used to say, one never knows when Ragnarok is coming. So dessert comes first. You Brands are a real trip. You Jorgensens are so stubborn. Inga elbowed him in the ribs but couldn't fight the grin. Alton laughed and grabbed his sandwich as she finally took a bite of hers. She had her best friend back. For the first time in what felt like forever, things felt normal. And he'd forgiven her. Somehow she felt like she didn't deserve it, but perhaps that was the beauty of forgiveness. It wasn't about what you deserved. It was choosing to look past a person's mistakes and give them another chance. Finn and Genevieve and Alton had each chosen to forgive her. Whether because it was the right thing or because they saw how far she'd come or because they knew what it was like to make mistakes and be forgiven by their own loved ones. Whatever the case, she was grateful. And she would strive to do better in the future. To be a better friend. Alton snorted when she chomped on a carrot, breaking the silence. She munched on it as loudly and obnoxiously as possible, and Alton laughed in that happy, unrestrained way of his when Johann ran into the room demanding to know what the ruckus was. She watched as Alton laughed with Johann and wondered. She wasn't ready for another relationship. Not for a long time. And she certainly wouldn't lead Alton on. She would be his friend and nothing more until. Or rather, if. Well, who knew what the future would hold? But for that same reason, she wouldn't completely shut the door on the idea. For now she was content to be his friend. And best friends didn't toy with each other's emotions. But she certainly didn't hesitate to shove him off the table when he tried to steal her brownie. That simply would not do. Genevieve found Finn on the bridge a few hours into the afternoon. He was alone, staring down at the swirling mists below with such a withdrawn look that she paused. She'd never seen him look so hopeless. Not even when he'd discovered how many of her people had died in the raid. She kept her footsteps light so she wouldn't spook him. He didn't seem to hear her approach, so she cleared her throat. Finn glanced over but didn't speak or face her. He just returned his eyes to the rocks below. "Hey," Genevieve said, crossing her arms against the railing beside him. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Needed some space." Finn said tightly. He still wouldn't look at her. Genevieve felt a touch of some unnamed emotion rising in her chest. She couldn't quite put a finger on what it was. "Should I leave?" Finn pursed his lips and said nothing. The meeting had been bad. Yesterday he'd been full of confidence, prepared to say and do anything to protect his family. Today, she'd seen the way he'd panicked, seen how quickly he'd lost control in light of Ali and Gray's scheming. Now he'd locked all those emotions inside and seemed quite unwilling to give them another inch. Not only that, he clearly wanted to be alone. Thunderheads rumbled in the distance. Genevieve still couldn't place that squirming emotion in her chest and turned to leave, to give him space. Finn snagged her wrist. "Stay." He turned those blue eyes on her at last and she saw how brittle and dim they looked. A bad day. Perhaps being alone is what he thought he wanted, but was realizing that was the last thing he needed. Looping her arm through his, she pressed close to his side and kissed his cheek. "If you want to talk, I'm here." He squeezed her hand in response, as if he didn't have the words or energy to say more. Honestly, she couldn't blame him. But that strange emotion had dimmed when he admitted that he wanted her to stay. As if she couldn't handle the thought of not being able to help him, or, even worse, that perhaps he didn't need her. Such a strange thing to feel and get upset over. That desire to be needed and be useful. There were much worse things to get upset over. She'd have to control herself, lest it turn into a bigger issue later on. She didn't know how long they stood in silence. She watched as the storm clouds amassing on the horizon approached the island of Burke, watched as the already busy village began to buzz with activity in preparation of the storm. Thunder boomed in response to the lightning that crackled in the clouds. They were so high up, Genevieve began to wonder about the safety of remaining on the bridge. "I thought I had time." Forgetting the darkening skies, Genevieve faced him in surprise. His eyes were still downcast on the ravine. He didn't seem to notice the weather, even as raindrops began to speckle the sky and tumbled into the abyss. "I thought I had time to figure out how to stop the spread of the slave trade," Finn said hoarsely. "But it's already here." "It's not too late," Genevieve said. "We have time. It's already spreading, like a disease." That familiar fire kindled in his voice, his eyes sharpening to a glare. People are too greedy to stay put in one place for too long. And why should they? Not when people hand them the keys to the treasury. "Hey," Genevieve leaned forward to meet his eyes. "We will figure this out." Finn abruptly straightened, setting that glare on her. "You don't understand." Genevieve felt a rush of temper. "I know the meeting upset you. That's putting it lightly. But you need to stay calm. I'm perfectly calm, Finn said in a low voice. Indeed he was, Genevieve thought. For now. Though perhaps a few loose strings away from snapping. Stop. Genevieve frowned. Stop what? Looking at me like you know what I'm thinking and feeling. I won't pretend to know what this feels like. Good, because you don't. Finn. Genevieve fought to stay calm. You're not being fair. You're lashing out at me because you're afraid, and that upsets you. He clenched his jaw and began pacing, even as thunder boomed overhead. Rain began falling in earnest. But the best thing any of us can do right now is to keep our heads. Getting upset never helped anyone. Finn spun around. Don't condescend to me when you don't know what it's like to be a slave. Genevieve flinched. Thunder cracked overhead just as the sky opened, dousing them in showers of rain. I didn't tell you everything that I've seen. Maybe I should have so that you'd get the full picture more clearly. Maybe I should have told you about the families torn apart. Finn. Or the kids begging in the streets, living in rags because they have nothing. Genevieve grabbed him by the arm as he passed. Stop. Not to mention the things they do to women. Finn, stop. Genevieve shook him by the lapels. I understand. I may not have seen it but I understand. It's foul and disgusting, the inhumane things they do to those poor people. You're right. I don't know what it's like to be taken against my will. I don't know what it's like to be beaten or to see such horrible things. I've grown up in a protected little bubble on the other side of the archipelago and I have been very blessed. But I have to have faith that we can stop this. They won't be satisfied without Cast Island, Finn said fiercely, his hair dripping with rain. When they realize just how fertile our lands are, how strong our people are. Then they don't make it to the borders, Genevieve said, still gripping his shirt. We set up a blockade. Around every island. Jenny. We do whatever it takes to not let them in. We double the guards, we secure the perimeters, send out scouts and search parties if anyone goes missing. If Outcast wants to give them an inch, they can just try and take a mile. Genevieve said adamantly. And when they come sniffing around our borders, they'll be met with dragon fire and steel. Let them come and see just what we do to slave traders. And when your reign begins, then we'll tackle the outlying islands where slaves are kept and we'll fight for them too. The slavers will be forced to rescind their control because they already learned it long before what happens when they mess with the archipelago allies. Finn was staring at her with a look of wonder, breathing hard. That's... He licked his lips. That's quite a plan. Genevieve shook her head, rain sluicing down her face. I already told you, you are not alone. Your parents, the chieftains, our combined armies, we have enough firepower to fight this. We have more than enough smart people to come up with solid plans. All we need to do is stay calm and prepare, and when the time comes to fight, we fight. She loosened her grip on his damp shirt. But never alone. We do this together. Finn took her face in his hands and kissed her. With the contrast of the wind and cold rain, his hands and mouth were warm and demanding, kindled by the emotions running through him. Genevieve allowed him to back her up into the nearest support beam, where he claimed her mouth with fast movements. He nipped her lip and she opened for him. His tongue swept in and tangled with hers, drawing a moan from deep in her throat. She drew him closer, clawing at his shirt to feel the skin beneath. Thunder boomed overhead, drowning out the sounds of his moan as she dragged her nails down his spine. She arched when his lips tore from hers and traveled down the column of her throat and collarbone, lower. Finn. She moaned. Even in the darkness his blue eyes were bright when they flicked up to hers. A naughty smile crossed his lips before he straightened and gentled his approach, kissing her gently. You know, he said, breathing hard. He swallowed once to catch his breath. Maybe we should announce our technical engagement to everyone while all the tribes are gathered. The words speared through her, clearing the fog from her brain. Then we can get married sooner and reap all the benefits. Genevieve choked on a laugh, even as her stomach swooped at the implication. You are so inappropriate sometimes. Hey, at least I'm honest. Though she tried to be annoyed, she couldn't help but savor the feeling of his body flushed against hers when he pulled her in for a hug. He nuzzled her ear, the skin at her nape, sending her skin crawling even as a squeal tore out of her. Finn laughed and kissed her neck firmly. I do love all the sounds you make. Rogue. Genevieve brushed a hand through his wet hair. He froze when she uncovered the slave mark, the real reason they were out here to begin with. She brushed her thumb against it gently. Remember what I said. This doesn't define you. We do this together. All of us. She slid her hand down his face. Don't despair yet while there's work to be done. A new light shone in his eyes at the reminder, the encouragement. When he kissed her this time it was gentle and soft, even as she wrapped her arms around his neck and he lifted her off her feet. Though she vaguely thought they should get out of the rain before the storm got worse, she couldn't help but think that kissing in the rain might just be her new favorite pastime. Finn pressed his forehead to hers, eyes closed. Thanks, Jenny. Finn felt more clear-headed than he had all day thanks to his amazing girlfriend. If it weren't for her patience and forcing him to stop freaking out and see reason and, not least of which, her amazing kissing skills, he'd probably still be out there brooding. As it was, her skin was pale from the rain when they finally arrived at the Haddock house. Soaked to the bone, their teeth chattered against the cold when they crossed the threshold and he closed the door behind them. Genevieve wrapped her arms around herself as a sound of dismay sounded from the kitchen. Don't tell me you two were out there in that. Astrid said, stomping up to them with a look of annoyance. The temperature is dropping, it's still early spring. You'll catch your deaths. Mom, relax, we got waylaid by the storm on the way home. Nothing we can't handle. Say that to your bandages, Astrid said, eyes flashing. Go change into dry clothes and we'll get new ones. And as for you. She surveyed Genevieve with a small frown. I might have some old clothes your size that you can borrow. Or perhaps Adriana does. Anyway, let's go digging. Oh, a treasure hunt, Finn said, peeling off his jacket and hanging it near the fire pit to dry. To aid in your quest, I'll advise that my favorite colors are blue and gray and... Finn, don't be a pig. Astrid said. She led Genevieve up the stairs in search of dry clothes as Hiccup snorted from his seat in an armchair. Laughing, Finn followed them up the stairs and ducked inside his room. He smirked at Genevieve's curious eyes darting past him before he closed the door. Nosy girl. He quickly found a pair of black pants and a warm wool shirt and socks before tramping back downstairs. He chucked his wet clothes into a hamper in the washroom and darted back into the kitchen to start some tea. He frowned at the dozens of tea bags, wondering which one to choose, which one Genevieve might like. He picked up a jar and gave it a curious sniff. It smelled all right, but a female voice clucked behind him. I wouldn't make that one, Adriana said as she slowly came down the stairs, Darren sleeping in her arms. She plucked it from his hand and placed it back on the shelf. That one's for other purposes than enjoyment. Finn blinked as she rummaged for another tea that was apparently good for enjoyment. Some teas are for particular things. Different herbs do different things specifically. Giving Genevieve a fertility brew would not be in her best interest. Hiccup choked on his coffee in the living room. His hacking and sputters could be heard from 2 floors up, apparently because Astrid came tramping downstairs. What's going on? Nothing, Adriana said sweetly and handed him a different jar. Make this one. She seems like a chai kind of girl. Shrugging, Finn gathered a kettle and water. By the time he'd set them over the fire, Genevieve came downstairs wearing a pair of dark leggings, a white shirt and a long-sleeved sweater. In her arms she held a bundle of wet clothes. Here, Astrid said, leading her to the washroom. Just throw them in here. We'll have them washed and dried and brought to your family's place. No arguments. What is one more set of clothing? Smirking, Finn watched as Adriana sat in a comfortable chair beside Hiccup's. Darren didn't stir as she settled and seemed to sigh in relief. Finally tuckered out, huh? Hiccup asked. Adriana nodded. She reached toward a nearby wicker basket holding blankets, but Hiccup jumped up and grabbed the floofiest one he could find before setting it on her lap. She smiled in thanks as Genevieve's curious voice wafted from the washroom. So these pipes, what do they do? Oh, those are for the water system Hiccup invented. If you pull that cord, it fills the tub with water, and a heating system beneath warms the water to a comfortable temperature. Wait, Genevieve interrupted. You don't have to bring in buckets of water. Hiccup practically ran to the washroom. Finn and Adriana shared a snort. Finally, someone who could appreciate his ingenious inventions. Not that Finn didn't appreciate it. He did. He just had to wonder how long it would last. Heated bathtubs and water pipes. Hiccup launched into a detailed discussion about mechanics and machinery. His mom retreated to the kitchen within a minute, already lost in the conversation. Genevieve followed up his explanations with interested questions and comments, to which Hiccup ecstatically replied, "Finally, someone I can talk to about mechanics." "Finn. You have my permission." "Oh, and what's for dinner, Mom?" Finn said, earning a quiet laugh from Adriana. Honestly, he didn't want to know what his dad had been about to say. "For the appetizer course," Astrid said, climbing over the back of the couch with a large white roll of cloth in her hand. "We're having clean rags." "Oh, my favorite." Genevieve and Hiccup emerged from the washroom in time to see Astrid peel away the sopping wet-blooded bandages. Adriana hissed. "Does it still hurt?" Finn shrugged, trying to keep still while his mom prepared the wraps. "It's okay. The worst is if I move too much or the gods freaking medicine." "Sorry," Astrid said, unamused. "It needs to be done or it'll get infected, I know." Finn met Genevieve's tense expression and he shrugged his brows. "Awful part of the body to get gangrene. Imagine having to lop my head off." "Finn, that's both disgusting and incredibly rude." Astrid nodded. "Finally, someone with some sense." The door abruptly opened to the sound of torrential rain. Eric darted inside with his coat pulled up over his head and shut the door with a heavy exhale. "Holy gods, welcome to spring." They all chuckled as he stripped off his coat and hung it up to dry, nodding in greeting at Genevieve, who took up a seat beside Finn. He strode to Adriana's side and kissed her forehead before gazing down at the sleeping baby. "He's so cute," Genevieve whispered, leaning to get a closer look. "Do you want to hold him?" Adriana asked, moving her blanket to stand. "I'll do it," Eric said, gently taking the baby in his arms and depositing him into Genevieve's. "And here we have our Aunt Jenny." A pulse of warmth spread through Finn's chest, though he wasn't sure if it was due to the name, the smile that leaped onto her face, or how quickly his family had accepted her as one of their own. As if they expected her to stay forever. A sharp pain in his neck obliterated those thoughts and he choked on a hiss. "Ow, Mom." "Sorry," Astrid said, finally finishing with the wraps. "I'd have thought you'd have a higher pain tolerance than this. I've never been slashed in the jugular before." "Let's not upset the baby," Genevieve said, cradling Darin to her chest. "You're right," Finn nodded. "Eric does have a weak countenance." Eric spun around from pouring himself a cup of tea. "Hey." Grinning, Finn leaned into Genevieve's shoulder as she pulled the blanket away from his face. Seeing her with a little baby in her arms with that small, contented smile. "He's so precious," she whispered, smiling up at Adriana. She met Finn's gaze and blinked in surprise at their close proximity, noting the knowing smile already on his face. "What?" Finn shook his head, ignoring the amused look his family shared between themselves. "Nothing." He almost wanted to ask what they were thinking. Almost. If Adriana knew where he was right now, she'd definitely give him an earful. Eric knew this as a fact, and he didn't blame her. But with the convocation nearly finished, he felt as if his chances were slipping away. If he really wanted this done, he would have to speak up. There was simply no other choice. He'd been planning to confront Brandine all day. He'd mulled it over, what he'd say and do. Of course he hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not Adriana or Finn or Hiccup. On the one hand, it wasn't perhaps one of his smarter plans, but on the other, he was confident that he could do this. He didn't need help and he didn't need everyone else speaking for him. He was the head of his own household now. He had to step up or appear weak. But as Eric had planned to approach his mortal enemy when he left the Great Hall, he found the Great Hall to be -1 Brandine Anderson. Highly suspicious, Eric thought, considering everyone of worth was in the Great Hall. Except. Eric had slipped out without another thought and rode Charger to the Haddocks as fast as possible. But the Haddock house appeared just as they'd left it. All the guards stood at attention when they swooped into a landing, confirming nothing suspicious had happened. So where was Brandine? Eric and Charger landed at the hatchery, where he left his dragon and continued on foot. Even though the storm had passed quickly, it left the air heavy with moisture and the smell of rain. Eric leaned over the edge of the perimeter fence, squinting down at the darkened docks where low voices echoed up from the chasm below. Then he stalked down the planks without hesitation. He knew he was being reckless. Maybe this is what Finn felt like every day, making decisions with his heart and not his head, asking questions later. But he didn't care. If Brandine thought he was going to sneak away from Burke again without anyone noticing, without giving Eric a chance to say his piece, he was surely mistaken. He softened his steps as he approached the last stretch of dock. A large group of men clad in black and grey bustled around an outcast ship, loading barrels and other forms of cargo as quickly as possible. They'd yet to notice his arrival, so he hopped up onto the nearest barrel and waited, fiddling with the strap of his quiver slung across his chest. Now that he was closer, he could hear snatches of conversation much better. "I just don't get why we're abandoning our post," a guard muttered. Chief Ali said. "Too much," Brandine hissed. "If she hadn't opened her mouth at the meetings, you know it would be over. I've heard everything I need to. We'll regroup and figure things out later, but not here." He swung a heavy bag onto the ship, grunting softly and shaking his arm in pain, probably from the savage bite wound Finn had given him. "Yes, but the plan is over, aren't you listening?" Brandine straightened and looked the guard in the eyes. "Hiccup did his job well, the ruse is over." He halted, eyes darting over the man's shoulder to see Eric sitting on the barrel. "Larson." The guards spun around, hands on their swords. Eric couldn't help the smirk. "Leaving so soon? That would be the second time you leave Burke with your tail tucked between your legs like a coward." Brandine's dark gaze leveled with his before he jerked his chin to the ship. "Get on board. I'll meet you in a minute." "But sir," the guard withered under Brandine's glare and was the first to scurry aboard the ship. The sound of footsteps was the only sound for a few moments as Brandine slowly approached. "You run a tight ship," Eric said, crossing his arms. "No questions, few comments, short leash, abandoning the plan. It's a wonder they haven't mutinied yet." "We're not pirates," Brandine said in a bland tone. "What do you want?" "I'm on a tight schedule. I want many things, not least of which is seeing you hang for your crimes," Eric said, standing. A white-hot pulse of anger laced his tone. "But of course you're leaving early like the coward you are. After all, if you stay through to the end of the convocation, you'd be arrested." Brandine sniffed in amusement. "None of you can prove that the child is mine. You'd have a trial, but I assure you, you wouldn't be leaving Burke alive. Resorting to death threats now, Larson. I admit I'm surprised. You're becoming more ruthless than I ever expected." "Touch my family again," Eric said fiercely. "And I'll show you just how ruthless I can be." "Very cute, but your meager training sessions with Finn have given you little advantage." Brandine smirked, noting his blink of surprise. "Oh yes, I know all about your training. I know everything about your family." He took a step forward, forcing Eric to yield a step. "If you think I stopped paying attention after I left, you're sorely mistaken. You didn't know we were on jet," Eric said, fighting past the fear cutting through him. "That was you on the Changewing, it was Sid." Brandine sighed. "Yeah, I'll admit it. That was me. I didn't expect Burkians to be there, let alone Finn and his pesky father. Poor timing on my part, I'm afraid." "So you're in charge of the raids?" "I didn't say that." Eric shook his head. "All of it was tied together, being woven together like a spider web. And Brandine was the spider." "Why are you doing this?" "All of it, why? It's quite simple, really." Brandine grinned, and for the first time Eric felt a flash of recognition. With the scar, the toothy smile, he looked exactly like Dager. "Because I can." Eric's mind raced. He'd inserted himself into their lives all those years ago with every purpose to ruin Adriana's life, to destroy her character, but why? What had she done wrong to him? It didn't make sense. Plus Brandine knew so many things about what had happened here the months after he'd left. He hadn't known they were training the Jetans, or else they wouldn't have raided while Finn was there, But somehow he found out about Finn and Genevieve's relationship. And it was obvious that he knew very little about the baby and Adriana's whereabouts. Perhaps he didn't care, but Eric wasn't buying that ruse. He wanted to know very badly. Then it clicked. It was Donna. Eric noted the flash of irritation that broke Brandine's amused demeanor. Donna was the spy. And when she got banished, you lost your inside man. Or woman, I suppose. Brandine sucked his teeth. I admit I wasn't happy to see her. She was supposed to stay until told otherwise. But she kept asking to leave Burke and was apparently willing to do just about anything to get banished, which includes Finn apparently. He smirked. I heard he didn't take it well. She's a wild ride. Eric's lip curled with disgust. She attacked him. I'm sure he's fine, after all he's got Genevieve to lick his wounds now. Brandine glanced at his ship before slapping a hand to his forehead in mock forgetfulness. Oh, I almost forgot. I have something for you. He reached into his jacket and Eric flinched back, reaching for his bow. Relax, Larson, if I wanted to kill you I'd have done it already. Brandine withdrew a folded document from the inner lining of his coat and held it out. This is for you and Adriana. Call it a parting gift. Eric stared at it. In the dim lighting, it was hard to read, but it appeared to be some sort of official document from Burke's archives. Still, when Brandine held it out, he didn't take it. It's not going to bite. Brandine shook his head. You're too suspicious, Larson. Eric gingerly took the paper. It only took a second of scanning for him to recognize it as an official adoption form. Exactly the adoption form required to overrule the law about the duel over fatherhood. What are you playing at? Eric asked, looking up after a few seconds. I know you're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart. You'd be right. Brandine said. I have my reasons. Turn it over. Eric turned the paper over and found Brandine's signature at the bottom of the page, along with the witnesses. For a second, he stared down at the page and back up at Brandine. You're serious, he said. It wasn't a question. I mean, if you don't want it. Brandine reached for the paper, but Eric jerked it away. Yeah, I thought you would. What's the catch? Brandine took a step back, away from Eric and the precious document he held. You leave me alone. Don't expect me to visit. Don't ask me for money. You take the kid and you never contact me again. You stay away from me. You, Adriana, and it when it grows up. Eric gritted his teeth. It is my son. There was an unmistakable flicker of pride on Brandine's face. Well, only if you sign this document. Unless you'd rather I just leave and not come back for 12 days. Eric remained silent, staring at the document. It had an official outcast seal at the bottom next to Brandine's signature. Eric's eyebrows jerked upward at the sight of Ali the Insincere's signature as Brandine's witness. There was no question as to whether he had done this whole thing properly. He knew that he really should take the legitimate document and be grateful, not poke the bear. But he wanted to know why. Brandine had so much advantage over them. He could force Eric to duel to the death, kill him and split the parental rights between himself and Adriana. Those two things alone would cause Adriana and the family so much pain. If he truly wanted to make them suffer, why didn't he do it? If that wasn't the plan, then what was it? Unless Brandine really, truly and honestly, did not want the baby. What other explanation could there be? Finally, Eric looked into his enemy's face. So I take it this is goodbye then. Because this deal goes both ways. I don't want to see or hear from you ever again. Leave my family and my people alone. Brandine paused before replying next, a smirk curling his lip. I'll make you a promise, I'll never try to take your precious Adriana or the kid from you. Eric gritted his teeth. That doesn't answer my question. Brandine extended his arms. Do you want this kid or not? You're not in a position to bargain. I will do what I want and you can be saddled with diapers and messes and wake up in the middle of the night for this thing. As far as I'm concerned, we both get what we want. You can be the stand-up family guy and I can be free. You should be grateful. Grateful? Eric demanded, tucking the paper into a pocket inside his jacket. What, like you're gifting me something out of the goodness of your heart? I made my choice and I'm sticking to it, not once did I ever stop to think about your opinion. As far as I'm concerned, you lost that right the second you cheated on Adriana. That was the day I stopped caring what you thought and stopped keeping my mouth shut. From now on, I will do whatever it takes to raise my son in a happy, healthy environment, and you'll excuse me for not giving you a single ounce of credit for it. Then it seems we both understand our roles well. Brandine said, eyes unwavering. You do what you do and I'll do what I do. But enjoy it while you can. Times are changing in the archipelago. By inserting yourself right into the thick of it by marrying Adriana, I can't promise who won't be caught in the crossfire. He must have seen a look of fear flash across Eric's face because Brandine grinned. He took a few casual steps back until he turned, grabbing onto something in the middle of the air. Eric blinked, his mind not quite grasping it as Brandine hauled himself up into the air until a pair of yellow-green eyes materialized in front of Eric's face. He lurched backward, Sid's maw dripping with steaming green acid. It landed on the planks with a loud hiss, disintegrating the wood in moments. Eric put space between them, wondering if this was how Brandine would have him killed. Maybe this last conversation was all a ruse to get him comfortable and foolishly believe that this was goodbye, when really it was goodbye in a whole other fashion. Brandine laughed. Like I said, you're too suspicious. If I wanted to kill you I would have. Count yourself lucky. He pulled up on the reins as the ship groaned, ropes snapping free of their tethers. The anchor was pulled up from the depths by the outcasts and slowly the ship pulled away from the docks. Sid and Brandine launched high into the air, the latter giving him a mock salute. Until our next meeting, Larson. With that Sid wheeled around and flapped after the ship, quickly disappearing into the darkness. Eric was slightly breathless as he listened to the churning of the waves below the docks, the hissing of the salt water as it rushed over the spots of green acid still bubbling on the planks. Just like that, Brandine was gone. Eric whipped out the paper again and read it, eyes nearly crossing in the effort to read it again. Against his will, his eyes burned. It almost seemed too good to be true. He wouldn't have to fight the duel. He could be Darren's dad without fear of looking over his shoulder, at least not right now. He'd be a complete idiot to assume that they would never see Brandine again. But he couldn't help the crazy, irreversibly happy laugh that clawed its way up his throat as he turned and sprinted back up the docks, tucking the paper safely back inside his coat. He had to tell Adriana. Adriana was almost asleep when the door burst open downstairs. Her parents and Finn scolded the person for nearly giving them a heart attack, but moments later Eric had charged his way up the stairs and closed the door to her old room, where she would now be staying. She'd insisted on giving her parents their room back, so Cliff and Taryn had brought over some of their own bedding so as not to use Cliff's. Darren was currently sleeping in the small cradle beside their bed. She almost scolded her husband for nearly waking him. All these thoughts evaporated when Eric held out a piece of paper, his hands shaking. Annie, read it. He was breathless and sweaty but his eyes were bright. Take it. What is it? Adriana asked, taking the document and reading it. She frowned, scanning the lines. It's an adoption form. Her eyes grew wide and she stared up at him. Where did you get this? Brandine gave it to me. Adriana's heart shuddered. Eric, he's just trying to trick us. No Annie, look. Eric sat down and flipped it over. See. He signed it with Ali as his witness. But we didn't witness it. How do we know it wasn't forged? With her seal. Annie, it's real, it has to be. Eric, babe, listen to me. Adriana set the paper aside and took his hands. Everything Brandine does is for a reason. This can't be real. We'll have Hiccup look at it. Ali's still here, we'll make her confirm it. The convocation isn't over yet, of course she's still here. Adriana said, finally look him in the face. What's going on? Eric heaved a sigh, as if forcing himself to go back and tell the story took great effort. Brandine left and he gave me this. All we have to do is sign it with a witness of our own. And what does he want for it? Adriana demanded. There's no way he gave this to us for free. His only terms were that we don't expect anything from him. He didn't ask for anything in return. You're sure about that? Eric cut himself off, starting to look annoyed. Do you think that this isn't the most important thing to me right now? That I'm just walking into a trap? Look at it, it's a real formal document. Adriana pursed her lips and scanned it again, reading line for line. So many doubts crept into her mind, but there it was, Brandine's signature in that old familiar handwriting she used to know as well as her own. And yes, that was the outcast chieftain's seal in black wax beside her own name. What if it's a trick? Adriana asked in a small voice, holding it to her chest. A false sense of security. What if it's not real? Eric took her hands and kissed them chastely. I understand, trust me, I was shocked when he gave it to me. I didn't believe it. But I think he honestly meant it. He doesn't want Darin. He might hate me, but it's more work for the rest of his life than it's worth to make the claim and saddle himself with a baby. I don't believe for a minute that we'll never see him again. I'm not that stupid, but what I do know, Eric swiped his thumbs across her cheeks to wipe away the tears that had fallen, is that this document gives me the right to be Darin's dad, and legally he cannot take that away from us. All we have to do is sign it. An overwhelming sense of relief swept through her. She covered her face in her hands, tears falling in earnest. The paper crinkled as Eric gently pulled it away and set it aside before he pulled her into his arms and rocked her gently. After countless months of fear, waiting for Brandine to show up and ruin her life again, after all the threats and potential situations of what could happen and all the stress that came with it, he'd truly dropped it. He'd signed adoption papers of his own free will and given them to Eric. She knew it wasn't out of kindness. He had to have done it for some reason. But right now all she felt was relief as she pulled her arms around Eric's chest and cried. She wasn't going to lose him to a duel. She wasn't going to split her time between Burke and Outcast Island. She wasn't going to share her son with that monster. A beam of hope filled her chest and she smiled, despite the tears. She tilted her head up to find Eric's face equally tear-stained, yet happy. Breathing a laugh, she brushed some of his tears away, her heart burning with happiness for him, for their little family, for the hope they now had in their future together. Adriana kissed him firmly and felt the hope in her heart burn stronger, bright as a star. Chapter 47, Full Circle. Chapter text. The screech of terrible terrors filled the air as villagers boarded the ships, shouting their goodbyes to friends and family alike. With new and rekindled friendships renewed, emotions were high for those wishing their beloved goodbye as they wouldn't be seeing each other for some time. Perhaps until the next convocation. Finn's emotions were also running high, like a caged beast stalking behind the bars of his ribcage. He didn't want Genevieve to leave. Or any of the Sullivans for that matter. After Brandine had left, the remainder of the convocation had gone without a hitch. After Ali and Gray the Gulful revealed their schemes to advance the slave trade, tensions had run high. But much to the relief of many gathered at the table, Ali had announced her early departure. She signed the treaty with little fanfare and left, taking her black-robed posse of minions with her without so much as a backward glance. It was like the sky had cleared after a hurricane. All the merriment prior to Ali's arrival had returned. Finn once again wondered why they even bothered to keep them in the treaty. If the outcasts wanted to jump into the hole they'd dug themselves into, then so be it. Good riddance. But the chieftains had a point. At least united, they could keep a set of checks and balances on their war-happy fellow tribe. Still, it had been such a relief when they finally left. With Ali and Brandine gone, the tension had left his parents' shoulders. They could breathe again, and Finn had been pleased to see them laughing with Kara, Frederick and Sven over dinner last night. Just as they were now shaking hands and promising to keep in touch should anything suspicious happen. Finn had no doubts that his dad was mostly worried for Sven. Now that Brandine's cover was blown, he'd lost the element of surprise, but he could still formulate a coup against Sven and his council. A shiver ran down his spine at the thought. Are you going to spend our last minutes together brooding? Finn turned to Genevieve, a small smirk stretching across her pretty face. I'm not brooding. I'm thinking. Is there a difference with you? When the subject of my thinking is anything but myself, I'd like to think so. Genevieve's eyes darted to the chieftains he'd been watching mere moments before. They're going to be fine, you know. She faced him again with a more serious expression. They'll double their security like they talked about yesterday in the last meetings. Brandine won't do anything stupid. He's patient, Finn said. He'll wait as long as he has to. According to Eric, he said as much. Finn still didn't know what to think about the document Brandine had offered up to the Larsons, officially giving up his rights as Darren's father. He'd seen the reservation but relief in his parents' eyes too, but he wouldn't be so easily fooled. Brandine would never give up so easily. Brandine knew Eric would seek him out before he could sneak away, that's why he had the letter on his person. That's why he didn't deliver it to the Larsons himself. Make no mistake, Finn said. Brandine sees life as a game of cards. He might have lost this hand but he doesn't plan to lose the game. Genevieve wrapped him in a hug and pressed her lips to his cheek. You worry too much. Sighing, Finn set his chin on the top of her head and cleared the swirl of thoughts from his head. She was right, he was becoming a worrywart. Still, even as he focused on the soft threads of her sweater under his palms and the stray curls tickling his face, he vowed not to let down his guard. They would see Brandine again someday. Whether in a month, a year, or 5 years. He had no doubts in his mind that their old enemy would return. In what manner, he had no idea. But when he showed his face, Finn would be ready. Genevieve inhaled deeply and turned her face up toward his, drawing his attention. So when are you coming to visit me? As soon as I can. It won't take long for things to go back to normal around here. Your village is going to feel quite empty once everyone is gone. Indeed. Some of the outlying villages had left last night, like Millie the Frilly and Jade the Just. With nearly a day-long journey by ship, they'd planned to get a head start on their travels. Most of the neighboring tribes didn't have quite so far to travel. If the Jatans left now, they'd hopefully get home by dark. They were currently packing their ships of cargo, including the newly purchased wares from various villages. They'd even stocked up on a series of Burkian dragon riding gear and saddles. Finn noted a familiar-looking blue, beaded saddle fit for a young boy. Cliff had especially been proud of his work on it. Finn smiled, wondering if Cliff would be taking Taryn on a nice date soon with the proceeds. And just like that, Finn's thoughts turned back to the newly acquired slaves that were working out Cast Island just an hour's flight away. How they weren't being paid a copper for their work. How they were likely being abused to work harder, faster and non-stop until their bodies gave out. He couldn't stand it. He was pleased that he wasn't the only one disgusted by it, if the ferocious response of the chieftains was any indication. But in time, they'd forget. They might be able to keep the slave traders from crossing their own borders, threaten Ali and Grey with war if they schemed against the other tribes. But it didn't change the root of the problem, that people were being held against their will. He didn't know what he was going to do. But he sure as hell wouldn't sit here in his comfortable home a few leagues away knowing some of those poor people didn't even have proper clothing, let alone food or shelter or money to purchase such commodities. No, not commodities. Things they had the right to have as humans. Finn swallowed the frustration rising in his chest and pressed his cheek to Genevieve's hair. If she saw the expression on his face she'd know exactly what he was thinking and he didn't want to admit these thoughts to her right now. And he didn't want to admit that in their last hour together, as she'd jokingly pointed out but was in fact painfully true, he was standing here brooding instead of enjoying his time with her. I'm going to miss you, he said quietly. Genevieve pulled away just enough to look into his eyes. Me too. But we'll see each other soon. No more 3-month vacations, mister. Hey, that was purely against my will. I begged on hands and knees to come see you. That's not what I heard. Oh. What did you hear exactly? Genevieve scoffed. Please, it's no mystery you're a workaholic. I'm sure after a mere week someone mentioned me and you said, who's Genevieve? Finn choked. Impossible. Impossible to admit that it's true. Stubborn to the bitter end. Why are you being so mean to me? Finn crossed his arms. Our last moments together and you choose to question my loyalties. Work or Genevieve, she said, raising her palms up and down in a weighing motion. I don't know, it's a hard choice. Well, obviously you weigh more to me than work, Finn said, then bit his tongue. Genevieve's eyes widened. Are you calling me fat? No, I'm not. I'm just saying you mean more to me than work, Finn said in a rush, ignoring the flush that rose to his face. Genevieve's peal of laughter was bright, drawing the attention of many on the dock. Your face. You're so mean, Finn muttered, scrubbing his hands over his face. He'd never hear the end of it. I hate to break up the party, Thuggery said, emerging down the docks with a wrinkled nose. But we're almost ready to leave. No, Genevieve's mirth fell away. She glanced at him sadly. Well, I guess I'd better call Max. She froze and realization dawned on Finn at the same time. Distracted as they'd been with the convocation, Darren's birth, and everything else, they hadn't seen Max or Zap in days. Genevieve's eyes got wide. Do you think? Let's find out. Finn grabbed her hand and pulled her down the docks. Wait. Where are you going? Thuggery called. If anyone asks, Finn shouted, running around a man herding a group of sheep. We're looking for Max. Well, hurry up. They wanted to leave soon. Finn's neck was throbbing and itching beneath the bandages as they ran up the wooden ramps leading into the village. By the time they made it halfway through the village, they were both sweating. Thank the gods most of the villages had left by now, or they'd have to cut through all the crowds too. Isn't Genevieve gasped for breath. Isn't there a faster way there? Nope. What felt like eons later, they finally sprinted across the massive bridge that led to the Haddock's house. They still had a ways to go though. Almost there. Genevieve wheezed. Finn came to a halt at the edge of the bridge, staring down the path at his house. An idea struck him. Wait, here. His lungs felt like they were about to burst, but he pushed himself toward the barn and threw open the doors, praying she was there. A large purple head rose from the hay, blinking sleepy yellow eyes at him. Lily yawned and blew a few smoke rings out her nose at him in greeting. Lily. Come on girl, we need a ride. Lily huffed and lay down her head again in the hay. Hey, just because Anna's been pregnant for 100 years doesn't give you the right to be lazy. She turned away, curling her tail around her body. Lily, it's important. Who are you yelling at? Genevieve emerged, face flushed. She blinked at the snoozing purple dragon. Adriana's. Yes, the lazy butt. Finn approached and poked the dragon's neck with a boot. Hey, don't ignore me. Finn, let's just go. By the time you get her to agree, we could have been there. Yeah, but then we have to run all the way back. Genevieve winced at the unpleasant thought. Come on, Lil. Finn crouched down and scratched her scales. You can't honestly be that tired. Lily huffed, her great heaving lungs sending bits of hay swirling throughout the room. Finn chewed his lip, looking around the barn for something, anything that might interest the monstrous nightmare. I'll give you some fresh cod later. Her eyes cracked open. Close, but not enough. Then, he spied it. The jar of whale oil. Finn withheld a sigh. He hated whale oil, but Adriana always used to rub down her dragon in the stuff. A quick glance at her normally shiny purple scales proved that it had been a long time indeed since she'd gotten a nice rub down. He hated the job. He did it for Zap once in a while, but she was smaller and usually fell asleep during the event, and she had the benefit of not bursting into flames when she got excited. And Lily was covered in that mucus secretion much different to Zap's. But what other choice did he have? They were on a time crunch. He closed his eyes and forced himself to say the words. How about some whale oil? As predicted, Lily's sleepy eyes shot open. She raised her head and faced him, sniffing eagerly. Finn retrieved the jar from the nearby shelf and held it up. Whoa! Genevieve laughed as Lily rose to her feet and followed him outside. She must love that. Oh yes, Lily loves a good rub down. Haven't had one in a while, have ya, girl? Finn asked. Lily purred, lids drooping in pleasure at the thought. He snorted. Okay, well I'll tell you what. You give us a quick ride and when we come back, I'll give you a nice big rub down. Sound fair? Lily huffed a smoke cloud into his face. He coughed and waved it away. All right, let's get your saddle then. He made quick work of locating the saddle big enough for two and saddling Lily. Finally they were in the air, saving time as the fields blurred beneath them until they gave way to a sandy decline and marshland. Genevieve's arms tightened around his waist when Lily dove and back flapped to slow her landing. Why are we stopping here? Shockjaws can be volatile at this time. Best Lily keeps her distance. He patted the dragon on the nose and they crept forward into the marshes, watching their step once again from all the little pools of water between stalks of grass and cattails. Finally, Finn whistled. Zappy girl. The only sound was the wind blowing through the grass and the distant crash of waves on the shore. They waited but neither Zap nor Max appeared. Stay close to me, Finn whispered and took Genevieve's hand before creeping closer to where they'd last seen Zap and the eggs. They approached the little divot in the ground and paused. The depression of yellow flattened grass was empty save for pieces of cracked, splintered stone. No, not stone. What was left of the eggs? Finn straightened and looked around. They must have gone somewhere. Though he couldn't be sure. Really, they knew so little about shockjaw habits. So they've hatched, Genevieve said, looking around as well. Perhaps they flew off. If the babies are like most dragons, they won't be able to fly just yet. Finn said, marching toward the water. They'll probably swim. It happened so fast, Finn had no time to recover. A dark blue mass blasted out of the water with a savage roar. Water sprayed everywhere, dousing them as they collapsed, two strong, clawed legs trapping them on either side. Finn found himself once again eye to eye with Maximus, his monstrous teeth mere inches from his throat. Max! Genevieve yelped, quivering beside him. Finn kept his mouth shut. It was his fault for not thinking it through. Max was highly aggressive anyway, a predator in every right. He had a sweet temperament when he felt safe or had no reason to be aggressive. Protecting his newborn young did not fit in that category. Finn prayed Lily would not approach or they might very well die here. He vaguely wondered if Zap would react the same. If she even cared about him anymore. Max, Genevieve said in a softer voice. It's me. Please, we're not here to hurt anyone. The ferocity slowly seemed to leave Max's deep blue eyes. A trickle of fear rose in Finn's chest when Genevieve slowly stretched out a hand and stopped a few inches away from Max's muzzle. He sniffed it and blinked, his eyes clearing more and more by the moment. The sneer left his face and he exhaled heavily through his nose before slowly stepping back. Finn could have sworn the look said, "I almost killed you idiots." Slowly he and Genevieve sat up. They were soaked from the salty water sprayed on them, combined with the marshes they'd been unceremoniously tossed into. Max sat down and surveyed them, blue eyes darting from head to toe to make sure he hadn't hurt them. So Genevieve said. "I see there's no one home. Where is everyone? Can we meet them?" Max pinned a look on Finn as if critiquing him and his motives. Finn fought against the irritation. Zap had been his dragon for years, long before Max had come along. He'd never hurt her or their babies. But he didn't need to voice these things, nor did Genevieve. Max seemed to read the thoughts going through his mind and stood, bobbing his head toward the water. Turning, he trudged into the shallows before he disappeared, wings, tail and all. Well, Genevieve clicked her tongue. "I hope he doesn't expect us to follow." Finn snorted. "I'm just glad he didn't kill us. Good thing I trained you so well or we might be dead." She rolled her eyes. "Proud to the bitter end. You know it." A ripple formed in the water until two blue heads appeared. Zap yipped in excitement and swam faster, pumping her wings until her feet hit the shallows. Finn didn't realize he was grinning until she knocked him flat on his back, showering him with kisses and snuggles. "Oh Zappy girl, I missed you too. Sorry we haven't come back, it's been a busy." "Oh my gods." Finn looked at Genevieve but found her dark eyes wide as she stared at the shallows. That's when he registered the sound of tiny growls. He leaned around Zap's broad shoulder and gasped. Climbing all over Max, hanging off his horns, chewing on his tail, were 5 blue baby shockjaws. "Oh my goodness." Genevieve pushed her hands into her cheeks until her lips puckered. "They are so adorable, I could die." "Don't do that," Finn laughed in amusement before he slowly stood. The baby shockjaw chewing on Max's tail paused, eyeing him from afar. Finn crouched and smiled. "Hi there." Curious, the baby stood on wobbly legs and stretched its wings. Finn wondered if they'd just hatched that morning if they were still so wobbly on solid ground. His analytical thoughts evaporated when the baby crept forward and sniffed his hand. Carefully, he touched the baby's nose. It jumped back with a surprised yip, but seemed to realize the touch didn't hurt and crept closer. A laugh interrupted the silence and Finn looked over his shoulder to see two of the babies, one dark and the other light blue, crawling all over Genevieve's lap and chewing on the ends of her hair. Grinning, Finn slid into a crisscrossed position on the wet grass. The baby shockjaw in front of him crawled into his lap and curled up, yawning widely. Resting his chin on his knee, he was soon fast asleep. His tiny baby scales were so soft, yet to harden with age. He was about to point this out when the sensation of wet leather slapped him in the face, dragging him to the ground and startling the little one in his lap awake. A light blue one stood with paws on his shoulders, staring down at him with wide baby blue eyes. Unafraid and fearless, she sniffed the entirety his face and neck, especially the wraps around his neck. "Ah, stop, that tickles. And hurts," Finn said, fighting to sit up, but she'd been joined by her brother, who was not so sleepy anymore. "Ow, let's not jump stomach ow. What am I, a punching bag?" Max and Zap sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the mayhem. Genevieve was still occupied by the two trying to eat her hair while the third and last baby found Finn's boots mildly interesting. "Please don't eat those, I need them for walking." "No, but really they are my best pair and they are not cheap," Finn hissed, fighting against the tiny dragon teeth trying to eat his ear. He pushed a hand between his skin and the baby's mouth and firmly pushed it away. "Hey, stop that." The navy blue baby growled and slapped its tail on the ground, lifting Finn's brows. A tiny Max, that one. He'd just turned back to the other two still trying to eat his boots, unaware that the incensed baby had stretched out his wings and slashed his tail right at Finn's right hand. A near paralyzing shock made his hand go numb and Finn leaped in his seat with a shout, shaking out his hand. He didn't need to look that a couple blisters were probably forming. An earth-shattering roar shook the puddles of water beside them. The babies yelped, trying to scurry away from their incensed mother. The navy blue boy who'd zapped Finn didn't make it very far before Max grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. He hung from Max's teeth, tail curled inward as he was produced to zap. She growled and slapped her tail against the ground, a mighty splash of water shooting up around them. Finn felt touched that she was disciplining the little turd on his behalf. "Let me see your hand." Genevieve slid closer and hissed, turning his palm over to reveal half a dozen small blisters. "Well. Yeah, they do that. I'll put some salve on it later." "Good. Hopefully they will learn early not to do that." "I'm sure they got the picture." Finn smiled. The sight of the little navy blue baby now tucked between Max's paws in a timeout was a beautiful sight to behold. "Well," Genevieve said, turning toward Maximum, "they're so cute and beautiful. Now I suppose I just need to figure out what the plan is now. I suppose Max will have to stay. Maybe, or at least until the babies can fly." Finn mused. "I doubt they can fly that far even as babies. Then again, I could be wrong. They are born to fly. They could also hitch a ride on." Zap, a voice said. They whirled around to see Hiccup and Kiev standing above them on the ravine with amused smiles. One of the babies, the fearless light blue one, yipped and scrambled up the hill at the sound of Hiccup's voice. He crouched and held open his arms. "Well, hello there." He held her up and she wriggled against his firm grip as she tried to bite his wrists. "You're a feisty one, aren't you?" "Not as bad as her brother." Genevieve nodded toward Finn's hand, but he waved her off. "Anyway, how'd you find us?" "It wasn't hard," Kiev said, smiling down at the little shockjaws walking between his legs. "But I have to agree, we're ready to leave, and now with this development, well, I hate to say it, Jenny, but you may have to leave Max behind." Finn read the sadness in her eyes. She knew it was the right thing to do, but it would certainly be difficult. Then an idea struck him. Wait, what if she stayed on Burke for a little while longer? Perhaps the rest of the weekend or through the next week. It would give the dragons time to grow a little bit and we can go from there, and when Max is ready they can fly back together. Kiev winced. "You said yourself that is a long flight to do by oneself." "Leave Thuggery," Finn said. "They can fly back together. It would be good practice for both of them." Hiccup, though distracted by murmuring sweet nothings to the baby dragon, seemed to consider this. "It's not a bad idea, Kiev. It would be good for them and we don't mind if they stay for a few more days. It's up to you. Kiev chewed his inner cheek with indecision. He saw the hopefulness in both Finn and Genevieve's expressions. Finn just hoped he wouldn't shut them down. What was the harm? Oh, all right, who am I to break up the dream team? Kiev said. But I want you home within a week, Jenny. I'll go relay the information to your brother. Genevieve grinned ear to ear. Won't Mom be upset? Leave her to me, Kiev said with a wink. We simply must be going right away though. Our people are eager to return home. Great, Hiccup said, dropping the baby into the grass once more. Genevieve can learn more about Burke and our family while she's here. It will be a great opportunity. Finn grinned, excited at the prospect of Genevieve staying with him for another week. The possibilities were endless. The places they could go without distraction, the adventures they'd have, the time they could spend together before she returned to Jut. He was so excited he could hardly think straight. A clean slate, a new adventure. There would be lots of ups and downs along the road, but he knew with Genevieve at his side, with his friends and family supporting him, together they could face anything. Finn brought Genevieve's hand to his lips and kissed it. I wouldn't have it any other way. It was upon the brightest of afternoons that Cliff decided that he was thankful for life's quiet moments. After this long and stressful week, he felt that a vacation was in order. A time of rest and relaxation. Never before had he really appreciated a quiet village than after the last of the allied tribes left, leaving Burke feeling empty and silent. Compared to this last week's proceedings, it now felt like a ghost town. So when he found himself lying on a grassy knoll a small distance from the village with Taryn at his side, her small hand clutched in his as they stared at the clouds, he found that silence was the best form of recuperation. Odd, considering his knack for talking. Still, it was just as enjoyable, being able to sit in silence with his beloved and ruminate in nature's music. Birds sang in the trees, occasionally punctuated by an off-key terrible terror as the wind rustled the leaves on the newly budded trees. Ah, springtime and all its happy sounds. You're awfully quiet. Cliff faced Taryn, a smile pulling to his face at her amused expression. I'm just happy to finally have a quiet afternoon with my girl. No extra anecdotes or diatribes needed. Well, that's just odd, Taryn said, turning and propping her head on a hand. Who are you and what have you done with Cliff? He breathed a laugh and returned his eyes to the sky. Is it so bad to be thankful and happy that we survived one of the worst weeks in existence? He meant it as a joke, but the seriousness of the words pinged inside his chest all the same. Quite against his will, an air of seriousness fell like a blanket over his senses. So many bad things could have happened. But they didn't. Taryn said, tugging gently on a dark curl by his ear. Darren and Adriana are both healthy and safe, Eric didn't have to do ill, Finn is healing. He almost got his head chopped off. I swear if that guy pulls one more stunt I'm going to keel over. Considering all the things that happened, I'd say it all turned out for the best. Taryn said in a firm voice. Everyone is alive and well. Like you said, it's good to be thankful and enjoy the peace and quiet. She paused, a mischievous look in her eye. And make up for lost time. Cliff's brows shot up in surprise when she leaned over and kissed him. Okay, he hadn't expected this. And it was quite different than any kiss they'd shared before, seeing as she was leaning over him, snatches of her auburn hair tickling his face even as one of her hands slid up his chest. Quite the topic change, if one could consider it a topic change. Not that he was complaining. Taryn pulled back slowly but stayed in close proximity. Do you remember a few months ago when you asked me about the future? The hand he'd just slid around her back stilled, his eyes locking on hers as if she'd slapped him. Now if that wasn't a topic change for the ages. Or perhaps she'd planned this. A segue for the ages then. Despite himself, he grinned. How could I forget? Honestly. I wasn't sure if you'd forgotten or if you didn't want to talk about it. He'd thought about it a lot actually. With every date, every bit of time they'd spent together he found himself drawn to her more and more. He'd never cared for anyone quite like he cared for Taryn. He wanted to discuss their relationship more, where they might be going, what the future might hold, but after she'd decided to consider her opinion on the matter more, he'd opted to allow her time to think. But as time had gone on and the weeks had merged into months, he'd started to wonder if she was avoiding it. "I'm sorry, Taryn sat up and Cliff followed suit, his heart thundering. "I know I took a long time to consider my response. I should have said something sooner, but I guess I used the convocation as an excuse to wait." Cliff swallowed. To wait for what? Taryn took a deep breath and met his eyes. "I've never done this sort of thing before, so I've been really nervous. I've sort of been waiting for the right time to say this." He thought his heart might burst with fear and trepidation. If she didn't spill the beans soon, there might even be some gnashing of teeth involved. With all this hesitation and her words, for some reason it sounded like the beginnings of a goodbye. If that happened, he didn't know what he'd do. "I know now that I shouldn't have waited," Taryn continued. "With the Haddocks as a prime example, anything could happen at any time. And with everything we've heard about the meetings, with Ali and Gray and the spread of the slave trade, with the thought of war, should the worst happen," Taryn said, wringing her hands. "I don't want to waste another moment." Well, now he was really confused as to where she was going with this. His mind flooded with a million questions. "So, what are you saying?" Taryn took a deep breath and took his hands. "I believe that dating should have a purpose. I don't want to wander aimlessly without an end goal in mind. After all this time, I've never quite had a supportive friend like you. You've encouraged me to get out of my comfort zone, to figure out who I am since the very first day. I've never had so much fun with another person as I have with you." He couldn't quite fight the smile, though his stomach still squirmed with discomfort, unsure where she was headed. "It's been quite the journey, watching you bloom into the pretty rosebud you are." Taryn grinned, breathing an awkward laugh. She'd never stop being so beautiful, especially when she smiled like that. "It's all thanks to you." "No," Cliff said, reaching up and pushing a stray hair out of her eyes. "You were already beautiful and kind and sweet. You just needed a little encouragement, that's all." He smirked. "Pretty flowers aren't meant to be kept indoors after all. They are supposed to go out and enjoy the sun, and they require a little tending with some water." Okay, Taryn laughed, waving off his analogy. "Anyway, I know what I want for the future." He read the seriousness in her voice and his own grin slipped away. "I've thought about it a lot and I've come to a decision." Her eyes leveled with his. "I want you, Cliff. I want to get married." Taryn wasn't sure what exactly Cliff was thinking. Judging by his raised brows, puckered lips and wide eyes, she'd guessed that he was surprised, maybe a little confused, but she couldn't gauge his response by such a dorky expression. She shoved down the urge to laugh, lest he think she was making fun of him. She truly meant this very seriously. But gods, he was so adorable. Cliff opened and closed his mouth a few times, similar to that of a fish. What?" Taryn breathed a laugh and squeezed his hands. "Not right away. But I love you, Cliff. I want to make this official. We don't have to rush, we can take our time, but I know that I don't want to waste time by not telling you what I feel and how much you mean to me. When you asked me about the future, I admit it caught me a little off guard because we hadn't been dating very long. But when I considered what was important to me and where I want to go in life, it made me realize that I don't want to spend a day without you. I want to laugh and cry and walk through life with you. And..." Taryn swallowed. "And though this is a small reason and doesn't carry as much weight because of hypotheticals, but with the archipelago's future at risk, I want to live every minute to its fullest. And I want to do it with you if you'll have me." She knew she was rambling and hoped it made sense and wasn't ridiculously cheesy, but Cliff's face slowly softened, then crinkled with amusement. "Taryn Brand, are you proposing to me?" Taryn blew a long breath between her lips and rolled her eyes, even as he cackled with laughter. "This is serious." "No, I know, I'm sorry." Cliff cleared his throat. His face was slightly pink but he took her hands again without hesitation. You mean it? You really want to get married?" Taryn nodded. "You remind me so much of Kurt. What sort of lovely, kind, adventurous man he was, what kind of amazing older brother he was." Tears pricked her eyes. He and Dowd wanted to have such adventures. They would have been wonderful parents. She met his eyes again and found his glassy too. I want to live life to the fullest, just like they did. She didn't think Cliff had ever looked so touched and happy. He pulled her hands to his lips and kissed them firmly. Then let's have an adventure, Miss Brand. Taryn laughed. She didn't know when the tears had started but felt them fall down her cheeks in wet streaks, which he quickly brushed away. He closed the distance between them and kissed her softly yet firmly, and it was perhaps the best kiss he'd ever given her. They would take their time. There was no rush. She had no doubts that he'd want to plan a big event around his proposal, whenever that should happen. It may be many, many months from now, and he would need to speak with her father in the meantime. But still, it felt settled, full and sure like the very ground beneath them. They would do this together from start to finish. They were a team. And an adventure was quite possibly the only recipe she needed with Cliff at her side. When Hiccup got home in the late afternoon with the strong desire to replace his leather flying suit with comfortable clothes and not hear from anyone outside his family for at least 2 days, he strictly charged his family not to open the door for anyone and even threatened to put a sign on the door stating "Do not enter, visitors not welcome." Astrid did not take kindly to such rudeness. So while he did change into a comfortable pair of trousers and long-sleeved wool shirt, he could only hope and pray that nobody would come calling for his attention about some catastrophe, village or archipelago alike. So when they received a knock on the door at 5:30, he sent a withering glare toward Astrid before marching to the door, mustering up as much energy to sound kind and patient. He was utterly shocked when he found a familiar woman on the porch with dark hair and kind yet slightly nervous blue eyes. "Laufen." He stared, all annoyance forgotten. I thought you left with the outcasts." "No." Laufen said, wringing her hands. She took a deep breath. "I plan to return to Outcast once Johan leaves for his next excursion, which is only in a day or two. We have unfinished business." Which explained her nervous expression, no doubt. Glancing at Adriana watching curiously from the living room, Hiccup stepped outside and closed the door. He offered Laufen one of the porch chairs, which she accepted. They sat in silence, observing the troop of shockjaws playing in the dirt nearby while Lily blew smoke rings in ecstasy while Finn and Genevieve gave her a proper rub-down of what appeared to be whale oil. "It's a beautiful day," Laufen said. "A perfect day for rest after such a trying week." "What do you want, Laufen?" Hiccup asked, in no mood to bandy words. "And I'd choose your next words carefully because if you're here on Brandine's behalf." "No," she said, blue eyes widening. "I came on my own." "Why?" Laufen took a long, deep breath. "I came to the convocation because I had suspicions that Brandine was plotting something. I haven't seen him in so long that I knew if I came to Burke, I might get a chance to see him and find out what he's doing." Hiccup settled deeper in his chair, fighting annoyance. "And how well did that work out for you?" "I cornered him the day after he arrived. He was very off-put that I was there. Told me to stay out of his business and go home. Yeah, he's a sweet kid." "What does this have to do with me?" "Hiccup, please, I'm trying to." "Trying to what?" Hiccup burst out. Finn and Genevieve looked up from across the yard and he exhaled heavily, trying to control his temper. He lowered his voice. "Do you have any idea what he's almost cost my family this week alone? He cheated in the duel twice and almost killed Finn." "I know. He tried to scheme his way into getting his position as chief back." "I know. And he could have easily stolen my daughter's baby away from her and killed her husband to boot. What more do you want from me?" Laufen sat rigid in her chair but her expression was calm. "Nothing except your forgiveness, though I don't expect it. My son has done terrible things. If I'd tried harder perhaps I could have helped him, done something to make him into something better." Her voice broke and her eyes took on a glassy look. "I am sorry. I'm so sorry for everything he put you and your family through." Hiccup exhaled and shoved his hands into his hair, staring at the floorboards between his leg and prosthetic. It wasn't her fault that her son had made choices to follow in Dager's footsteps. Only Brandine was responsible for the things he'd done. But that did not mean she would not feel responsible, just as he and Astrid had felt responsible for the horrible things Finn had done as a struggling teenager. It didn't excuse the person's actions, and it wasn't always a direct result of bad parenting. But a good parent would still feel terrible for the things their child had done to hurt others. He exhaled again and dropped his hands. "I'm sorry. I know how hard it is to deal with the things your son has done and be powerless to change them." Lofen stared across the yard toward Finn, eyes welling up with tears. "Except your son turned into a great young man. He learned from his mistakes and endured the pain of the past. He has not let those things rule over him. What I wouldn't give." Her face crumpled and tears slipped down her face. She turned those bright blue eyes on him. "Never forget that." Yes, he had much to be thankful for. Finn easily could have turned into something worse after everything that happened. If the accident with Eric's leg hadn't happened, if he hadn't been filled with such remorse. No, it was more than that. If he hadn't decided to let Ratri go, if he'd chosen to kill the old man who'd caused him such pain and suffering, who'd caused Binnen such pain and suffering, then perhaps that would have been the day they'd lost Finn forever. And he'd made that decision all on his own because he was the better man in the end. Whatever decisions Brandine had made, whatever point in time in his life that he'd decided to hold on to his rage and anger and let it fuel him and turn him into the vengeful, fierce, and cunning person that he was today, that was on him. Not Lofen. Suddenly Hiccup felt something for Brandine that he'd never felt before, that he never thought he would: empathy. Another lost boy in a dark, cruel world who had to play his hand with the cards he'd been dealt. But if he'd chosen better, things wouldn't be what they were today. He wouldn't be in the hard life he was now. Regardless, it didn't excuse his sins. He had no right to hurt Adriana, to manipulate her or hurt the numerous ways he had. Hiccup shook his head, clearing his thoughts. There was nothing to be done on the matter. Brandine was guilty for the horrible things he'd done. Nothing about his past could justify that. Hiccup had done what he'd had to save his family, and it had cost Dager his life. If Brandine chose to follow his father's footsteps down the very same path, then that was his choice. And to protect his family, Hiccup would do it again. It might very well break him to fight one so young and hateful, but he'd do it. For his family, he'd do anything. Lost in thought as he was, he didn't notice Finn and Genevieve arrive until they were standing at the railing, his son's face clouded with irritation. "Everything okay?" Finn asked, sizing up Lofen in a quick once-over. Yes. Hiccup straightened in his chair. Whatever they'd been talking about could not have been pleasant, judging by the emotion on her face and the way his dad forced himself to sound more upbeat. "Just talking things over. Finn and Genevieve, this is Lofen. Brandine's mom." Finn said in a flat tone. "I remember." Lofen gave him a wan smile and nodded to them both in greeting. "I was just stopping by." Sure, Finn said, wiping his oily hands on a rag. "A little chit-chat never hurt anybody." "Finn, don't be rude," Genevieve said, giving the woman an apologetic smile. "Answer me this then," Finn said, locking his blue eyes on Lofen's. "Are you here for yourself or Brandine? Because if you think you deserve to be here because you're my nephew's biological grandmother, you're sorely mistaken." Lofen's expression flashed with hurt, but she didn't quail under his gaze. "No, I never expected to be. I came here out of good conscience, not to make any demands. That wouldn't be right, and I'd never be so cruel to sweet Adriana." Fine. If that was the case, then he'd relax his approach. Still, with everything that had happened this week, he wasn't about to take any chances. Certainly not where his sister's baby was concerned. He had no qualms about calling Lofen out. The way she spoke, though, unflinching and firm, triggered something in his memory. It shouldn't have snagged his attention, but it did. An odd sense of déjà vu swept through him as he stared into Lofen's aged but still beautiful face, those blue eyes level with his own. He didn't quite know what to think suddenly. Perhaps he was just forgetting some event, but no, he'd never met Lofen before, right? "Do I know you from somewhere?" Finn asked. Judging by the others' expressions, they sensed the shift in his voice and body language. Lofen blinked in surprise. The question was so odd that it even threw his dad off guard. "You probably met sometime while Addy earned." Finn shook his head. No, we never met while they were dating. Loffen shrugged slightly, a little perturbed. I don't recall ever meeting, no. Why do you ask? It's so weird. Finn murmured, squinting. Like. Now that he stared, her blue eyes looked so familiar. Maybe that was it, but how was that possible? If they'd never met, how could he possibly recognize her by her eyes alone? But it was also in the way she'd stood up for herself, some long-lost memory echoing in his mind. He hardly felt Genevieve elbowing him in the ribs. It's rude to stare. Loffen offered him a small smile, which Hiccup returned with a shrug. I frankly don't know what. With a crack of thunder shooting through his body, he remembered. The blue eyes, the soft smile, the unwavering and firm tone when she spoke. How she might have been afraid to come here after everything that had happened, but she didn't allow that fear to hold her back from doing the right thing, from being brave. It was subtle but clear as day. He barely felt himself step away from the porch, Genevieve's and his dad's voices echoing around him. It's not possible. A torrent of memories accosted him. The brightness of his eyes despite going through so much pain. Doing the right thing no matter how much he'd been wronged in this cruel world. Refusing to make excuses for a boy who did terrible things but still deserved to be loved despite those mistakes. Dear, are you all right? Finn. Genevieve stepped in front of him and tried to force him to look at her. His eyes had welled with tears, but he didn't care, no matter how shocked and concerned they all looked. He had to know. Loffen. Finn's voice wobbled slightly. Was your mom's name Camille? Loffen's blue eyes widened in shock. Yes, but how did you know that? Hiccup looked between them, confused. I might have shared your story with. Slowly, it dawned on him and his green eyes widened in shock. Holy gods! Genevieve and Loffen stared at each other in concern. Whatever you two are on about, Loffen said in a bewildered, trembling voice. I would love an explanation. Finn didn't have the words. He couldn't think past the suddenly overwhelming emotions coursing through him, even as his dad fumbled for the doorknob and demanded for the others to come outside. Astrid, Adriana and Eric joined them moments later, each looking bewildered. Hiccup took Astrid's hands and stared at Loffen. Astrid. Loffen's mother was Camille. She didn't seem too thrilled about the information at first, but knew it must mean something by the tone with which he said it. Okay. It was Benin, Finn said in a choked voice, the tears slipping down his face. Your dad was Benin. Stunned silence. Adriana and Astrid stared and then launched into questions. Eric and Genevieve stared at him in complete shock. How do you know? Sniffing, Finn stepped toward the porch. Benin was a slave, kept on a farmhouse in Mayro, a long way from here. He had a secret relationship with the homeowner's daughter, Camille. And for the shame of it, she was forced to give the baby away. Benin never got to meet his baby girl, but he never forgot Camille. And before he died, he told my parents that story. Loffen's hands shook, her expression stricken with disbelief. How is this possible? Finn shook his head. Benin always said everything happens for a reason. You know what this means, right? Adriana said, coming to Loffen's side and taking her hand. This means that Benin was Brandine's grandfather. She smiled in amazement. Benin was Darren's great-grandfather. We're family. Loffen's eyes welled with tears. All my life I've wondered who my father was. If he ever wanted me. If he ever loved me. He did. Hiccup said. I think never getting to meet you was one of his few regrets. When he told the story and spoke of having to stay away while Camille had you, when they sent him one direction and you in another. I think that was one of the worst days in his life. Loffen let out a small cry and buried her hands. Adriana cooed and wrapped her arms around the old woman. Slowly, her arms came around Adriana. When was the last time Loffen had gotten a hug? Had she ever had a hug from someone who truly loved her? Here, Finn realized, was another example of the cruelty of slavery, and it was the final nail in the coffin, hardening his resolve once and for all. Loffen and Adriana pulled apart. His sister said, we're family now. Not because of Brandine but because of Benin. He was very much the grandfather we didn't have growing up. He taught us so much and offered so much light and happiness to our little family. He was the strongest person we've ever known." She turned misty eyes on Finn, and he nodded. Lofen stepped down the stairs and paused in front of him. "You were the closest to him." Finn nodded again. "I was in the Great Hall, you know," Lofen said softly. "When you defended the slaves. I think he would have been very proud." She lifted her arms and pulled him into a warm hug. He didn't know how it was possible, this little miracle before them. Another of what some would call a strange coincidence. No, never a coincidence. Everything happens for a reason, that's what Binnen always said. Life was a gift with its many surprises. And as he brought his arms around Lofen to hug her back, he could have sworn he felt the ghost of a hand on his shoulder to replace the proud smile glimmering in her blue eyes. When they pulled apart, Lofen gave him a grateful smile. "If you would be willing, I'd love to hear his story. Everything you can remember." Finn nodded. "He was the best person I ever knew. I'd be glad to." And Adriana approached and took her hand. "I want you to meet your grandson." Lofen's eyes flickered with worry. "But..." She looked up at Hiccup, whose face softened. "I meant what I said," Adriana said firmly. "We're not just connected because of Brandine, but Binnen. To deny you that right would be to deny Binnen, and he was always welcome here. I want you to meet him." Adriana met Finn's eyes and he nodded again. Even after all these years and all the ups and downs his family had endured, Binnen was still here. Lofen squeezed Adriana's hand, clearly fighting emotion of her own. "I would be honored." Without another word, Astrid opened the door and waved them in. They all entered as a family, Genevieve's hand clutched in his own. She reached up to wipe his face and he breathed a short embarrassed laugh. "All these women making me cry." "Oh hush, I think it's cute." Finn snorted as they took seats on the couch. "Of course you do." Lofen gracefully took a seat in one of the armchairs, blue eyes gazing around the room in wonder. He wondered if she'd ever been inside a place that looked like a home before. His heart ached at the thought. Adriana came down the stairs with Darin in her arms. "Perfect timing, he's awake." Lofen went still as she approached. Adriana gently deposited him into her arms and stepped back, Eric wrapping an arm around her waist as they watched. Lofen's eyes filled with tears as she pulled the blanket away from his face and stroked his tiny cheek. He blinked up at her with sleepy blue eyes. "Hello, little one." Darin reached out of his blankets with a tiny fist and held onto her finger, earning a few small laughs around the room. "A good, strong grip." "That's good," Lofen said, beaming at him. "One day, perhaps you'll be the strongest of us all." To Finn's surprise, Darin's lips twitched in a smile. Adriana gasped and jumped closer. "Oh sure you won't smile for Mama." Lofen laughed and turned happy, grateful eyes on Adriana. She reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tight. "Thank you." And there it was. That genuine, bright and happy smile, the blue eyes. She was almost an exact copy of Binnen. That strange sense of déjà vu swept through Finn once again, almost like he'd had too much to drink or he was falling through the air. It was such a strange feeling, not to mention how crazy it was they were here in this situation, but here they were. Binnen's long-lost daughter, his nephew's grandmother, the mother of their arch-nemesis. Things had just gotten more complicated and yet, for Lofen Sake, more simple. 10 minutes ago he'd been ready to do whatever it took to spare his parents and sister more pain by throwing Lofen out himself. And now he was ready to fight tooth and nail for her. Binnen's long-lost daughter, returned home again. He'd tell her everything. From that very first hug Binnen had ever given him to their last days together when Binnen had done everything in his power to keep Finn from dying of that sickness. Even to the final day when he'd given his life for Finn. Binnen had been nothing but selfless and kind. And though she'd never gotten a chance to meet her father, Finn would make sure that by the end she would know him somehow. She would know every detail, every proverb and special thing he'd done. Like Adriana said, she was family now. Brandine aside, she too deserved to be loved and happy, like Binnen. Chapter 48, New World. Chapter text. Adriana stared at her parents, bewildered. Perhaps the early summer heat had gotten to her at last. But no, even Eric paused in his arrangement of various household items in the kitchen as if he'd not quite understood what had been said. "Come again?" Adriana asked, bobbing the sleeping Darren gently in her arms. "I said," Astrid said, stepping forward and wiggling her fingers in a give-me motion. "Your brother and Cliff organized a bonfire for your friends, and you both need to go." But Adriana gazed around the house, which was in much disarray. "The house is all over the place." "Actually, the house is still in one piece, still standing," Hiccup said, gazing about the living room as if intentionally ignoring the chaos around him. "Awfully convenient for one who was normally such a stickler for details. It will be here when you get back." "That's just it," Adriana said, relenting and allowing her mom to take Darren. "On a good day I couldn't care less about organization, but we started one project that led to another and just, well, look at this place." They'd put off organizing the large assortment of wedding and baby shower gifts for countless weeks. She'd never had the motivation while pregnant, and Eric never seemed to mind, given that he was busy taking care of her and working nearly soon up to sundown in the weeks following the convocation. He was determined to build them a bigger house as soon as possible, and with the large undertaking came a large assortment of projects. And to make this house saleable to others, that also required fixing things up around the small house, from changing worn panels to replacing the door Cliff had accidentally run his head through once. And by accident, that really meant he'd run at it full speed after Finn had dared him to use all his strength to open the closed door without using his hands. It had been a late night, Eric had amended, and distinctly prior to their marriage, an event with which he'd seen the light almost on a spiritual level and could now avoid such ridiculous antics. Right. Needless to say, all these projects and their preparations for the new house cost money, so he was working himself tirelessly. Now that Darren was almost a month old, they were ready to settle into their new life, just the three of them, and that required a house that at least had some form of structure. If they couldn't get this place in order, how could they manage something bigger? They couldn't even move around for lack of space. Overflowing laundry baskets and a tub full of dirty dishes. There were immense piles of empty boxes and tissue paper scattered on and around the kitchen table, which was also buried in towels, blankets, dishware, toys, and a large assortment of meat and vegetables that Eric had picked up from the market on his way home. Piles of wood shavings she'd finally managed to sweep into the corner lay forgotten after she'd had to stop and feed Darren. She'd finally resolved to take some responsibility and get this place in order. She didn't want to raise her baby in a dump. Besides, if it was bad enough for her to go slightly insane, it was bad. "The thing is," Hiccup said, taking in the mess with a casual sweep of his green eyes. "The house and all the things in it aren't going anywhere." "But you know what is?" Astrid asked, flipping her braid off her shoulder so it wouldn't wake Darren. "Your youth." Eric exhaled heavily through his mouth. "Fair point, but we've got so much to do. We don't have time." He looked up suddenly, his voice higher than usual. "Unless you want to go, Annie. You can. I'm not holding you back, and there's some woodworking I need to do anyway." Adriana frowned. "If I'm going, then so are you." "Great, it's settled." Hiccup clapped his hands. "Wheel." "No, I wasn't saying that," Adriana interrupted. "Look, there's not even a place to sit. There will be more hangouts with our friends, but not today." Her daddy's face fell. "Addie. Eric, come here." Begrudgingly, Eric obeyed. He stood beside her with his hands deep in his pockets. His wavy hair was sticking up in odd directions, as if he'd run his hands through it countless times. Now that he was up close, she saw how frazzled and tired he looked. Eric never got frazzled, but with all the changes this last month had brought, especially Darren keeping them up at night. "We've been here," Astrid said gently. "A young couple with a new baby, though we had two. We didn't realize how much work it would be. It is tiring. You two need to be able to step out now and then, have a nice date, or even take a nap if you need it. Or, in this case, spend time with your friends," Hiccup added. "You're both young, and it's important to maintain those friendships, and allow yourselves to be kids, too. Yes, you're married with a baby now, and the new house is a big responsibility, but that doesn't mean you never get to have fun." He shared a look with Astrid. "If you really don't want to go to the bonfire, then don't go. You can go on a date instead, or we can stay and help you organize the house. It's up to you. But I'd encourage you to think about it. You haven't had a fun night out in a long time. Adriana thought over their words. She was tired, yes, but sleep wasn't on her mind. Now that she thought about it, stepping out for a little while sounded nice. The thought of talking with friends and not worrying about diapers or feeding or cleaning for a little while, even if it was just for an hour. Maybe they'd come back and start fresh tomorrow and be able to actually accomplish something. She looked up at Eric, whose eyes were already on her. He'd do whatever she wanted. But she could tell he'd been cooped up in the house too long. He didn't get stressed very easily with his down-to-earth personality, but even he could get antsy. She could tell he wanted to be responsible and do what was expected of him, but that didn't mean he had to slave away in the house doing chore after endless chore on his one day off. Granted, the house was a mess. But her parents were also right. They could take a break, have some fun, and tackle more chores later. Adriana took her husband's hand. All right. Let's go. Even if it's only for a little while, it might do us some good to step out for a little bit. Relief flashed in Eric's face as he smiled. But Adriana said, gazing down at her stained, rumpled shirt. She could only imagine what her hair looked like. I'm not going anywhere without a bath first. Her parents and husband snorted as she marched off to the washroom. Far be it from her to go to any fun-filled occasion looking like a slob. Though she was sure that even if she showed up in her pajamas, her friends wouldn't mind. As the tub filled and chatter filled the living room, Adriana couldn't help but feel a flash of excitement as she poured a generous amount of lavender and lemon verbena bubbles into the water. Though her body had healed well in the month since giving birth, she truly hadn't had a night out in a long time. She'd be seeing her brother, Genevieve, who'd flown in that morning, and their friends. When was the last time she'd had a fun evening out with her husband, let alone with their friends? And Mara told her in their last checkup that perhaps in a few weeks she'd be able to fly again. Oh, to fly again with Lily. It had been far too long. Adriana slid into the hot water with a soft moan of ecstasy. OOF, forget the bonfire, she might just stay in here all night. When was the last time she'd had a relaxing bubble bath? She started with a jolt. She sat up with a splash and glanced around the washroom, hoping and praying she'd find one, and slumped back down in the water with a sigh. She'd forgotten a towel. Blast this pregnancy brain. Well, she supposed, she couldn't blame it on pregnancy anymore. New motherhood brain. Yeah, that sounded about right. Erfrafrafratic, she said in a long whining drawl. I need you. In no time at all, the door cracked open and he poked his head in. You all right? He snorted with laughter. Have you got enough bubbles? Alas, she could barely see him above the accumulated bubbles gathering around her. New motherhood brain, indeed. I forgot a towel. She stuck out her lip in a dramatic pout. Eric shook his head with an amused grin. Hang on. The door shut with a snap and Adriana sighed, settling deeper into the water so bubbles tickled her cheeks. It wasn't long before he reappeared, shutting the door gently behind him and setting the plush grey towel on a nearby bench. Here you are, lady. Anything else I can get you? A snack? Some of Gobba's finest wine? Adriana grinned. How about some bells for your ankles and you can do a dance? Ah, cheeky. Eric smirked, teal eyes flickering downward. Even though the vast number of bubbles in the tub obscured any view of her body, she knew exactly what he was thinking. You know. Don't not now, my parents are here. Adriana hissed, face flushing in a way that had nothing to do with the water temperature. Eric's laugh echoed through the room as he threw up his hands in mock surrender. Hey, can you blame me for trying? Her toes curled beneath the water at the thought. Technically, since it had been a few weeks since she'd given birth, Mara had told her to proceed with care. But the actual thought of doing that again so soon. She cleared her throat, trying to ignore his mischievous smile. You've become quite the rogue, Mr. Larson. At that he squinted as Adriana raised a hand, tiptoeing her fingers across the rim of the tub. But I suppose we'll have to get a rain check. Eric made an annoyed sound from the back of his throat before grabbing the doorknob. You, Mrs. Larson, are very evil. She blew a loud raspberry in his direction and gave him a sweet wave as he slipped out the door, grinning despite himself. She decided in that moment that she was glad to be in here and not out there, where her parents could be heard cooing over Darin. She hoped the walls weren't super thin because if they'd overheard this new heated form of flirting, she'd surely die of embarrassment. Still, she wouldn't be forgetting that smoldering look in his eyes very soon. There was something to be said about gathering around the fire with friends and loved ones. The sky was a muted purple-grey as the sun at last descended below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the faces, shadows dancing and bobbing in tandem with the flickering flames. Finn slid an arm around Genevieve's waist, smiling as she leaned into his warmth even as she listened eagerly to Helga's tale. "And since the ravenous beast had me by the legs and dragged me toward its open jaws," she said in a dramatic voice, wriggling her fingers for effect. "There was only one thing left to do." She leaped atop the fire pit and drew her sword, the girls squealing as she pointed it menacingly toward them. "I drew my blade and slashed the beast's tongue off." "You?" Tarin shuddered. "Nice." Inga grinned. "What did you do with it?" "Kept it of course," Helga said, sliding her sword back into the scabbard across her shoulders. "I sent a portion of it with Johan to have it turned into a nice leather jacket." Finn choked on his drink, laughing even as Genevieve gasped in horror. "And the other half?" Eric asked in amusement. 5 silver coins, says she turned it into a hat." Thorin smirked. 8. Evan slapped his hand. "But I'm betting it was a pair of boots." Morgan frowned at him with distaste, as if the idea was repulsive. "Wrong and wrong," Helga smirked, crossing her arms. "Any other guesses?" Adriana winced even as she asked, "A new riding vest." 10 coins, and I say blanket." Finn said. "Ah." Helga pointed at him, blue eyes crinkling in mischief. "Not quite, but Finn knows me best. For where else would I keep my most treasured possessions but in close quarters?" Genevieve's nose wrinkled. "Well, what else could it be, other than a pillow?" Helga's arms shot into the air. "Genevieve wins." Groans of disgust rose up around the fire pit, girls squealing in dismay while the boys roared with laughter. Genevieve herself looked affronted that she'd guessed correctly. "Yes, I had the rest custom made as a nice, rubbery pillow. It's actually quite relaxing, the texture." You, stop!" Tarin shouted, covering her ears. "Oh come on," Cliff scoffed. "Going for the tongue is too easy. Why didn't you go for the eyes? After all, that sort of beastie has the nice big, gelatinous orbs that glow in the dark. You could have boiled them down for gelatin or made a pair of glass eyes, or—" Finn didn't think Tarin's gag was faked as she suddenly stood and took a seat beside Adriana, far from her boyfriend, who seemed not to notice her sudden absence, knee-deep as he was in conversation with Helga. A pair of lips ghosted across his jawline, sending a shiver crawling down his spine. "Someone looks amused." Genevieve pulled back with a small grin. The firelight cast her face in sharp relief, setting the gold strands of her curly hair alight and setting her dark eyes glowing like embers. "Thinking of hunting some wicked man-eating plants to order some of your own tongue pillows?" "Why do I need tongue pillows when I have yours at my disposal any day?" Finn whispered, closing the gap between them with a kiss. She breathed a laugh and slid her hand up his neck. "Oh. Get a room." Genevieve pulled away, flushing at the hoots and hollers. Finn didn't care, they could say what they wanted. He loved her and he'd kiss her as often as he wanted no matter who was around. As long as she was in agreement, of course. Still, the flash of silver didn't quite escape his notice when both Evan and Thorin and Cliff handed coins to Helga, who grinned triumphantly. "What? I bet you'd wait until after sundown to kiss and they all guessed before. So I win." "No more bets." Thorin sighed. "Helga will bleed us all dry." Inga snorted. "Sore loser." "Gotta make a living somehow," my friend Helga said, jangling her money bag. "Thank you for your donation." Speaking of living, Genevieve turned to the Larsons, who were snuggled up on their seats looking tired but comfortable. "How's the new place coming along?" "Well, it's the old place we're more concerned with right now," Eric said, tapping his prosthetic against the stone pit. "Just fixing things up and trying to get it in order. I should start building in a few weeks." Well, let me know, Genevieve said. I can help. Finn straightened. You're not helping build the house. Actually, I was going to offer to watch Darin, but you boys can do that while me and Adriana raise the roof. Yeah, ass girl. Helga cheered, raising her mug. Genevieve shrugged her brows at him cheekily. Finn couldn't help but laugh. She'd never cease to amaze him, and put him in his place when necessary. If she truly had wanted to help build the house, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea, as long as he was there at all times to supervise. He planned to help Eric anyway, but... Oh, would you stop worrying? Genevieve elbowed him in the ribs. Honest, I'm going to help Anna. I've already made arrangements to help her get the current house in order, or distract baby Darin so she can focus. Many hands make light work, yes. Finn nodded. You're right. Hey, who stole my girlfriend? Cliff demanded, whirling around. He spied Tarin in deep conversation around the pit and leaped to his feet. Annabeth. How dare you steal Terbear from me? At least 3 people gasped as he tripped on his way around the pit, nearly toppling into the flames like the overgrown toddler he was. Evan caught him around the arm and steered him the right direction, much to everyone's relief. Cliff didn't seem to notice, but merely squeezed between Eric and Adriana, forcing them apart. Much to their displeasure, if their skulls were any indication. So, who wants to hear a funny story? Cliff asked, not waiting for a reply. Great, because it's great. So once upon a time there was a prince of a great and mighty kingdom across the sea. Are you sure that's a funny story? Adriana asked. Sounds more like an epic tale to me. Sure, don't ruin it. Cliff hissed. This prince had a name that would go down in infamy. His name was Fearless Finn. Hey. Finn frowned at the chorus of laughter. I won't go down in infamy. Fearless Finn was great at many things, Cliff continued as if there'd been no interruption. Fighting, riding his fierce electricity-belching dragon. She doesn't belch. Even cooking, if you can believe it. Indeed, there was nothing he could not do. Until one day Helga said. No. Cliff shouted, nearly breaking Eric's nose when his arms shot out in chaotic fashion. This is my story. Were you there to witness this blunder of vast proportions? No. Okay then. Suddenly, Finn knew exactly what story was being told. Wait. And so it happened that Fearless Finn's sister had a baby. Cliff continued in rapid succession, realizing Finn's ploy as he leaped to his feet and bounded around the fire pit. And Fearless Finn was advised how to change diaper, but baby nephew. Shut up. Finn hissed, trying in vain to shut him up with every bit of energy he had. He punched, pulled, yanked, but Cliff would not be moved from his seat. In fact, the Larsons were helping him to stay seated. Turns out baby nephew has great aim up. Cliff was dragged to his feet as Finn gave a mighty heave. Whoa. Watch the fire, Thorin shouted as they struggled, Cliff cackling madly. I'll throw you off this watchtower. Finn threatened. So your nephew peed on you, what's the big deal? Eric demanded. Finn released Cliff with a groan of irritation, though it went unheard with the loud chorus of laughter that echoed through the hills. He was pretty sure it could be heard all the way to his house. Seriously. It was embarrassing. Cliff threw an arm around his shoulders. The chief goes, that's karma for you. You peed on me once too, and pretty sure that sweater never smelled the same again. Tarin gasped. That implies that the chief wore it again afterwards. Well, I'm quite sure he washed it. Genevieve said, ever the voice of reason. Can we talk about something else, please? Finn pleaded. Some boys would call it marking their territory, Adriana said. Eric swiveled in his chair, looking aghast. The small smile on her face was unmistakable. He's just saying he loves his Uncle Finn. That's true, Cliff said, squeezing his shoulder and giving him a shake. But it's not Finn's fault he doesn't find it appealing. Oh my God, Finn shoved him hard. Cliff toppled into the nearest bench seat beside Helga, both of them cackling with laughter. Oh, you guys, leave my baby alone. Adriana said. Yeah, be nice to my nephew. Finn crossed his arms. Oh, Darin is fine, Adriana said, brushing a fleck of imaginary lint off her shoulder. "I was talking about you." And there went all sanity from around the fire. Everyone, even Taryn and Genevieve, were hunched over themselves, laughing so hard that tears had pricked their eyes. Finn stood in the middle of his circle of friends, all of them laughing at his expense. At least Eric was trying not to, but that telltale dimple was just too revealing. Finn huffed and marched to the nearest ladder, muttering under his breath about ridiculous friends embarrassing him. A few of them called him back, Cliff especially, though he was still gasping for breath. Away from the fire, it was dark in the small cabin area at the top of the tower. Up here he could feel the wind and see the first stars twinkling in the darkening night sky. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed, dropping into a seat on the floor so that his legs dangled over the edge. The lingering embarrassment faded and he released a short laugh at the memory. Adriana thought it wise to teach him how to care for Darren's diapers, should he be in charge of caring for the little boy. At first, like most things regarding babies, it weirded him out a little bit, but he reasoned that it was a completely necessary responsibility, and his little nephew depended on the adults around him to take care of him in every way. He trusted them. So Finn pushed the unease out of his mind and accepted the lesson with gusto. But he hadn't realized that there was a risk of being peed on in the process. He shook his head. In no time at all, little Darren had become a part of the family. The most pleasurable experience was making him smile, though he'd yet to laugh. Finn repeated his name to Darren almost as constantly as Eric and Adriana told him Mama and Daddy. He'd vowed to his family that Darren's first word was going to be his uncle's name. It was amazing how much had happened in the last year. A year ago, if he'd been told that he would be an uncle in 9 months, he would have laughed himself hoarse and probably thrown that person into the ocean. Still, despite the terrible things that had happened, he wouldn't give up his little nephew for the world. For one so small, he truly had filled so many little holes in his family's heart. From being named after the son his parents had lost, to fulfilling that desire of motherhood to Adriana and healing her wounds, to giving Eric a reason to assume his role as husband and father, even shaping the way Finn thought about the world. And last, but certainly not least, providing Lofen with a family after spending her entire life alone. The woman had chosen to move to Burke in the weeks since the convocation. As Brandine had made his decisions and hadn't kept in touch with her, she'd decided that she would follow in her father's footsteps. Forgetting what lay behind and instead focusing on what lies ahead. Finn's gaze drifted to the deep blue horizon where it melded with the ocean. Lofen's decision, and even Benen's decision, had resonated with him on both occasions. He remembered the true taste of freedom after his father had rescued him from the clutches of Ratri's cruelty. His father had fought tooth and nail across the archipelago for him and extended that hand to Benen, paving the way for a life of happiness and beauty that he'd not tasted for decades. So too had they extended that hand to Lofen. But Finn knew there were still so many out there who needed that help. Who were waiting and pleading with the gods for help, to send someone, anyone to rescue them. Well, it was enough. He'd waited and bided his time. He'd stuck to the rules and watched them bend around him. Day by day, their borders were being tested. It wouldn't take long for those borders and rules to crumble, when the slave trade would expand into their own territories. And by then it would be too late. So he'd bring the fight to them. There was no other alternative. But it was a mission he'd gladly give his life for, even if he put his own people's future in jeopardy to do it. A soft clang of leather on metal sounded, snapping him out of his thoughts. Genevieve appeared moments later, looking amused. "You all right?" "Yeah, I'm good. Just needed some fresh air after all that." "Well, a well-placed pun isn't exactly the deadliest of foes," she said as she cleared the ladder and came to sit beside him. "Ever heard of kicking a man already down?" he asked, leaning in close enough for a few curls to tickle his face. "I prefer to call it," Genevieve said, leaning closer. "Driving the nail home." "Ah, there's a fierce cruelty in beauty," Finn said, pulling back in mock surrender. "Or a fierce beauty in cruelty," Genevieve said. "I'm sure there are more puns to discover." No, I think I've had my fair share of puns for one night." "Well, being peed on is no small feat. You should wear it like a badge of honor. Just think, Darren saved that tinkle just for you." "Ah, would you stop?" Finn demanded but couldn't help the grin as she collapsed into his shoulder, giggling madly. You're almost as bad as Cliff. Almost. I can have mercy on a weak man. With lifted brows, Finn gave her a sidelong look, then elbowed her away at her wild grin. Full of insults today. You're in rare form. Oh, just think of all the possibilities, she mused, sliding closer and tilting his face toward hers. Her hand slid down his jaw, even as she bit her lip, drawing his attention even in the dark. Add insult to injury, and the more injuries you have, well. She traced a finger across his lips and he thought he'd go absolutely mad. What is it they say? I'll lick them for you. His mouth was on hers instantly, not allowing time for her playful question to hang in the air. Genevieve pushed her hands into his hair as he pushed her back and leaned her up against the wall. She matched his rhythm, moaning softly as he slid a hand around the curve of her waist. He pulled back and mouthed her jaw, already breathing hard. Gods, you say the dirtiest things. Finn murmured. Genevieve bit her lip and grinned, tilting her jaw and exposing her throat. Well, she was indeed in rare form tonight. He pinched her chin and pressed his lips to hers again, gentling his approach. Genevieve went boneless, her breath hitching as he slowly kissed his way down her throat and scraped his teeth along her pulse point just as he squeezed the curve of her waist. A moan sounded deep in her throat even as she nearly pulled the hair from his scalp. Finn whispered. Wouldn't want the others to come investigating. Genevieve's chest was rising and falling rapidly. She didn't seem to care, or maybe hadn't heard his words and pulled his mouth back onto hers, her tongue tasting and teasing his. Gods, he couldn't get enough of her, and didn't mind heeding her request for more one bit. He'd spend all night up here kissing if she wished. It felt like some time before they came back up for air. The stars were twinkling brighter and the laughter still sounded around the fire below. Finn's mind buzzed even as his skin felt flushed, every touch sending a pulse of electricity through his bones. Genevieve too looked dazzled and breathless, though he could barely see her in the darkness. Maybe that's what made it all the more alluring, like the time they'd made out in the library. He brushed a few curls out of her face, gentle in a way that he knew nobody else saw. Only for her would he allow himself to be so vulnerable, to be so gentle. She was strong in her own right and in many ways, but she was also gentle and sweet and kind. He would treasure her above all others. As if she'd sensed the direction his thoughts had taken, she pressed her face into his chest. He slid her arms around her back and held her close, turning them so they could see the stars. She settled deeper into his embrace when he rubbed her back gently in a relaxing motion. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts for some time, staring at the sky and enjoying the other's embrace. Eventually Finn began to wonder with the steadiness of her breath if she'd fallen asleep, not that he'd mind, when she slid a hand into the collar of his shirt and pulled out the Sullivan crest. He waited as she looked it over in the darkness, the raised golden edges flashing in the dim light. Do you think someday, she asked quietly, the archipelago might know true peace? The Jatans and Burkians have grown a bond of friendship in so little time spent together. It's so rare. But do you think that's something that can happen for all the tribes? Finn took a deep breath. Not while we're divided. Relationships of any kind take work, but while evil people are in power. Ali and Grey, and Brandine, out there scheming, who knows? Maybe someday we can unite the tribes under a true banner of peace. Maybe someday we'll live in a world where hate and violence don't thrive and dictate how people live. He shook his head. My dad changed the archipelago, how Vikings see dragons, and village by village he taught people to see them as friends instead of enemies. 50 years ago, my grandparents probably asked the same question. Will there ever be peace? Will there ever be a stop to the fighting? Maybe the work we do next will bring about a change. Maybe it won't be as drastic. Maybe we won't see the change it brings out. Maybe our grandkids will be the ones to see all our hard work come to fruition. He swallowed, lost staring at the horizon. But each hard day of fighting for that peace will have been worth it. Every day. Genevieve cupped his face and tilted it down to meet his eye. Then day by day we'll work, Finn. No matter the cost. Finn pressed his forehead to hers, hoping to convey with his eyes alone just how much her support and strength meant to him. Together, They would fight battles, whether in the Great Hall or in the skies. He'd teach her everything he knew. And she'd teach him everything she knew, when to stay his hand or think before speaking. How to have hope in a time of stress or grief or despair. Together they'd raise up a new generation of peace, from one end of the archipelago to the other. A new world that was safe and thrilling and full of opportunity for every man, woman and child blessed to call this world home. One day at a time, they would fight for that new world. No matter the cost. Adriana's hand was soft and warm in his, her cheek pressed to his shoulder as they took the long way home. While Eric felt exhausted after spending time with their friends, he felt refreshed. Taking a few hours to get dinner in the hall with Adriana and laughing with the others after a month of endless hours at the leather shop, choosing and buying property, preparing to build the new house, and figuring out how to be a better husband to his wife, not to mention how to be a dad. It was a wonder he hadn't collapsed yet. Lesser men had by now, Hiccup insisted, but he wasn't convinced. He thought he was doing a terrible job staying ahead. Sure, things hadn't fallen to pieces yet, though Adriana had fallen to pieces on more than one occasion. Figuring out new motherhood was no simple feat, and frankly, they'd both seen better days. With sleepless nights on the upswing and little time to talk and spend time together like they used to, it was no wonder Hiccup and Astrid had practically insisted they leave the house. Now he understood why. They were right, as most wise parents were. He'd have to make more time for Adriana. She wouldn't complain, knowing that he was doing his best to provide for them. But he'd made it a bit of an obsession. No job or chore or future plan was more important than the here and now, spending time with his wife, and separate time with his wife and child. They were two different responsibilities that must be tended to, much like a garden. He wouldn't tell Adriana this in so many words, but if he didn't continue to cultivate that garden of friendship and love, if he didn't stay close to her, and she to him, their garden would soon be overrun with weeds. "What are you thinking about?" Adriana murmured against his shoulder, her breath warming the material down to his skin. He blinked, surprised at that particular detail that had snagged his attention. "Ah, gardening." Adriana straightened with a snort. "No more projects." "No," Eric agreed. "Let's build the house first." "Let's clean the house we currently live in first," Adriana corrected, then sighed. "Let's not think about it." "Okay." Adriana swung their hands between them as they walked, gravel crunching beneath their boots. "Did you have fun?" "I did. It was nice to get out." Eric glanced at her face, trying to gauge her expression. "We should go out more often. It would be good for us." "Yeah, probably a good idea." Adriana nodded, but he could tell her heart wasn't in it. He tugged her to a stop. "What is it? Did you not have fun?" "No, I did." Adriana sighed, green eyes muted in the darkness. I don't know." "Annie, tell me. Does it sound bad that I feel guilty?" Adriana looked up at him. "Leaving Darin and our house a mess for a few hours. Why do I feel like I'm a terrible mother because I can't keep up with everything? Why should I have to take time off at all? Doesn't that just sound like I'm failing?" "No. Annie, not at all, no." Eric brushed her hair out of her face, sensing the cascade of emotions that had clearly been brewing over the last few hours. "I understand why it would make you feel that way. There's been a lot going on and I know I haven't been very supportive of you lately." Adriana looked up. "What are you talking about? You've been doing so much." "That's my point," Eric said. "I've been so busy doing things that I'm not spending time with you. You have to admit that it's felt a little distant the last few weeks." She seemed to consider his words and deflated a little. Of course, she'd noticed. Maybe she couldn't pinpoint it, but not having those daily conversations that they were accustomed to since childhood was starting to affect them. Already, the weeds were creeping in. "It's not your fault," Eric continued, squeezing her shoulders. "I've at least had the chance to get out of the house and do other things." "Things that need to be done," Adriana argued, clearly not intending to let him bear the burden alone. "Yes, but I'm still working on those things when I'm home, when you've been cooped up in the house with Darin all day. You're doing amazing considering how crazy the last few weeks have been, but at the end of the day, I need to be supportive of you, and I haven't been doing that. Eric sighed, trying not to let his frustration show too much, but he could feel it like a dragon, clawing at his insides with guilt. I'm still figuring this out, being a husband, and it's different with Darren, in a good way of course. I want to give you and Darren everything I can, but I don't want to get sidetracked by things that aren't as important as the people in front of me. Adriana's brow crinkled. She threw her arms around his neck and squeezed him tight. I know, but you're not doing a terrible job. We could both do better talking to each other. I hadn't realized how stressed you were until my parents came over, and it was like I was forced to pay attention to details I'd missed before. She pulled back and looked him in the eyes, so close he could nearly count the light freckles dotting her nose. We're a team. We're doing all of this together. So together, we'll work on doing better, for each other. Okay. Eric's heart warmed and he nodded, bending to kiss her softly. She traced his face with a hand before standing on tiptoes and leaning in closer, inhaling deeply, as if breathing him in. And just like that, it was like the days after they were first married. Their kisses before getting married had for the most part been chaste, maybe a little exploring, but not like the slow, burning passion they'd slowly build to in the weeks after saying, I do. In the weeks leading up to her giving birth she'd withdrawn a bit, their kisses returning to the chasteness of before. He didn't seem to mind. Not until now anyway, when he realized just how much he wanted her and missed her. Adriana made a small moan of displeasure when he pulled away. I think maybe we should head home, he said, his voice shakier than he'd hoped. He swallowed hard before continuing. Check on the baby. The smoldering look in her eyes dimmed slightly, but whatever she saw in his expression must have said it all, for she gave him a slow, rather wicked smile. What's the matter, Mr. Larson? Afraid I'll have my way with you out here in the open? Gah, Annie, Eric hissed, glancing around at the dozens of homes lining the streets. Don't be naughty. What, naughtier than your flirtatious attempts with my parents sitting in the other room? You, sir, are the naughty one. Eric grinned, having forgotten about that encounter. Well, you did say something about a rain check. Adriana hummed, sliding a hand down his chest and patting his thundering heart as if she knew exactly how fast it was beating. I suppose I did. She turned and sashayed away like the golden, green-eyed queen she was, effectively setting his blood on boil. Eric took a deep steadying breath and trailed after her, trying his absolute best to calm down and not make a fool of himself in front of his mother and father-in-law, seeing as they were literally a few yards from the house. Still, it took everything in his power to hold back when she turned a coy smile over her shoulder and grinned. Somehow she restrained herself. Well, a little bit. Ah, what the heck, it had been a long time since Eric had looked at her like that, and she had to admit it was kinda nice. A little more than nice. Okay, it was very nice. Shaking her head as she pushed the door open, Adriana greeted her parents with a wide smile. Hi, we're back. How did it go? Astrid asked from the kitchen, which? Adriana froze, and Eric nearly collided with her on the threshold. There was a flaw. The counters were cleared, various items still stashed in boxes but in much more orderly fashion, towels, toys, cooking utensils, and more. And? You replaced the door for me? Eric asked, staring at Hiccup kneeling on his hands and knees across the house, sanding the new door. Her daddy stood, shaking out his bad knee, and opened the new door, which moved on soundless hinges. Got you some new hinges, too. The other ones were rusty. You didn't have to do that, Eric said. Any of it. But, wow, guys, thanks. The place looks much better than we could ever have it, Adriana joked, gazing about in wonder. She'd almost forgotten what a clean house could look like. What this little house looked like without all the clutter. Great. It looks great. Eric said, shaking Hiccup's hand as he approached. Adriana stood on tiptoes and kissed his cheek. Yes, thank you. Things are more orderly now, so it should hopefully be less stressful to find a place, Astrid said, throwing an arm around her shoulders. Or if you'd like, just leave everything in the boxes. Less packing to do later. And Hiccup said. A moving trick, don't take your clothing out of your dressers. Just move the drawers themselves to the new house and put them back in the dresser when it arrives. No folding, no extra packing and unpacking, no hassle. Sounds like something my mom would say, Eric said in amazement. Hiccup opened his mouth but Astrid beat him to it. That's because she did. She was here an hour ago and helped us take care of a few things. She'd just seen Nicholas and Mel and tiny Eleanor. Ellie is cuter. Hiccup stated. Why give her such an old name? It's fitting for Nicholas, given that was our grandmother's name. Eric smirked. He'll cave eventually. Anyway, Astrid continued. She came by to see Darren next and put him to bed before she left, so he's in his room. You. Adriana hurried forward, her heart leaping with joy at seeing her son. Even a few hours away felt like an eternity. The others chuckled, mocking Hiccup for trying to steal Lara's wise packing tips as she entered the room, tiptoeing in the dim light. She gazed into the crib where Darren slept, a little squishy ball wrapped in a grey blanket with the words Little Warrior embroidered on the corner. She smiled, holding her arms over her chest. She'd be content to stand here all night and watch him sleep, his little tongue sticking out past tiny baby lips and his peach fuzz blonde hair. A hand slid up her back and she arched into Eric's touch, even as he pressed a kiss to her temple. Little guy's out, huh? Yeah. Want to say bye to your parents? They're putting their boots on. Adriana nodded, but bent and kissed Darren softly on the forehead, softer than a butterfly's wing bit. I love you. She turned from the room and watched as Eric slowly closed the door, leaving it cracked just enough for them to hear when Darren would likely wake in a few hours. Adriana waited for her parents to put their jackets on before embracing them both. Thank you for everything, the house and telling us to go out. She said, squeezing their hands. You were right. We needed to get out for a bit. Plus it was great to hear Cliff regale everyone with the tale of Darren peeing all over Finn. Astrid tried to cover her laugh with a snort. I bet he loved that. Oh yeah, he went to the top of the tower to brood for a while. But Jen went up there soon after, likely to lick his wounds. Adriana said with a mischievous shrug of her brows. They were still up there when we left. Ah, well, wives are good for licking wounds. Hiccup said, earning him a smack. They're not married. Yet. Adriana, Eric and Hiccup all said in unison, earning an eye roll from Astrid as they snorted. All right, let's go. It's late and Darren isn't the only baby that needs to go to bed. Astrid said. Hiccup tripped on the threshold. Hey. Eric laughed and wrapped an arm around Adriana's waist as they watched from the doorway. Stay out of trouble, you two. And thank you, Adriana called, waving. For everything. Her parents beamed. For you, Addie, Hiccup said. Anything. At any time. Astrid said. With a quick whistle from Astrid, Toothless and Stormfly ran around the corner looking sleepy. Apparently they'd been snoozing in the dark alcove between houses. Her parents mounted and waved as the dragons took off, disappearing into the darkness like a pair of shadows. Eric squeezed her waist and beckoned her back inside. She followed and surveyed the new organized house as he shut the door. It's amazing how much work they can accomplish when they set their minds to it, she said in amazement. It looks like a different place. It does. Eric's hands skimmed from her hips to her ribcage. I believe he said in a low voice against her ear. That someone called a rain check. Adriana blinked and laughed awkwardly. Well, someone was eager for my parents to leave. Well, a certain princess didn't want them present, Eric said, kissing her neck firmly. So yes, you might say I wanted them to leave very badly. Quivering with nerves and excitement, Adriana turned out of his hold and made a show of thinking about it. I don't know. I mean, I've got so much on my plate right now. Really? Eric asked, stepping closer. She stepped back as he approached. Baby's asleep, house is clean, a perfectly new door in place. What else is there to do? Adriana's back hit the back of the couch and she was forced to look up at his approach as he slowly closed the distance between them. What happened to the playful Adriana out in the street 15 minutes ago? She seemed to have vacated left stage, leaving her here, blundering away, the awkward, shy Adriana. What if, maybe she wasn't ready for this after all? Eric seemed to read the unsurety in her eyes and the amused smile faded. We can wait. Adriana swallowed. Did she want to wait? Mara said it was all right. It had been a month of healing after giving birth, after all. But maybe it wasn't an issue of her body being ready, but her mind. Maybe she wasn't ready. It was fear holding her back. Not of him. Never of him. But after getting comfortable without intimacy being an option so close to pregnancy and then giving birth, she'd almost forgotten about it. It was okay to be nervous, a healthy dose of fear before making a decision was normal. But she shouldn't let that dictate her decisions. In the last few weeks she and Eric had grown apart. They'd talked less, spent less time together even though they lived together. His confession had made it clear that he wanted to change that. He wanted to do better, to be better. And in turn she wanted to be better for him. Being afraid and holding herself back from him, not strictly in the sense of intimacy, but from being vulnerable and opening herself to him in all the ways they always had since childhood, being afraid was holding her back from her strongest friendship. Strong, blinding fear that she still wasn't good enough, that she needed to do everything perfectly to be a good wife and mother, that maybe he'd tire of her if she wasn't good enough. That sort of fear would kill their marriage. She missed that bond, that strong friendship. He was right, and her parents were right. They were a team and they needed to be a team in everything, every day, every hour. And that required trust and sacrifice. It required the choice to relinquish the things you want or might expect out of life and choose to do the right thing and not let fear hold you back. Wasn't that the very foundation of everything she'd learned in the last year? Eric reached up and brushed a tear off her cheek. What are you thinking about? Adriana swallowed. I want to be better, too. I don't want to live in fear anymore or feel insecure about everything, like I'm not good enough. More tears splashed down her face and Eric gently brushed them away. I have to stop holding myself to all these heightened expectations. I know you don't expect anything from me, so I don't want to put you on this pedestal as if everything that happens has to meet your approval. You never were that kind of person, and I'm sorry if I ever made you feel that way. No, Eric shook his head. Never, Annie. I work myself into a tizzy on my own. You've never made me feel like you expect me to go above and beyond. But on the same token, I don't want you to ever feel like you have to do what I expect. You are first and foremost my friend and my wife. I want you to be happy and comfortable, and if that means sacrificing my own happiness, then so be it. I love you, Annie. Don't ever change. With a choked sob Adriana threw her arms around his neck. He held her so tightly she could scarcely breathe, but she didn't care. A feeling of warmth and security swept through her, lightening her heart and soul. Smoothing those hard, bitter edges that had crept in unawares. In the weeks of busyness and change, they'd lost communication along the way. And she was ever so grateful that they'd picked up on it early. Perhaps she had her parents to thank for that as well. It could have been a few minutes or an hour, but it felt like the hug lasted forever, warm and comforting. Her tears had dried, but he continued to hold her until he knew she was ready to let go. In the light of their newfound resolutions, she remembered the whole reason she was pressed up rather uncomfortably against the back of the couch. She fought the urge to smile, deeming it a bit of a strange time to do so. What? Eric whispered. Of course, he'd noticed. Turning her face so her mouth was against his ear, she murmured, so when are you going to call in that rain check? Eric pulled back, keeping his arms banded around her waist as he scanned her eyes, noticing the relief she felt inside and perhaps noting the tinge of mischief returned to her voice. That he said slowly. All depends on M-Lady. M-Lady is waiting. Adriana whispered. She'd expected him to blink or swallow or shyly look away, like he used to when they'd first gotten married, when they first began learning the art of this coy sort of dance. This time he kept his eyes level with hers, unblinking as one of his hands slid beneath her shirt and slid up the skin of her back in a slow movement. Her breath hitched slightly when the other joined, his palms sliding beneath the band of her bra and pulling her flush against him. Her hands on his chest, she swallowed thickly at the desire in his eyes, which were still level with hers. Are you sure? Eric asked again, intent on ensuring that she wanted to, but still curling his fingers against her skin that sent shivers up her spine. Well, how could she not with such a simple touch causing her breath to catch in such a way? Thoughts and desires and memories flashed through her mind, of everything she'd experienced with him before. The end days of pregnancy had turned her off to the idea, then with the healing process after giving birth, the whole thing had sounded undesirable, but now, she wanted. Grabbing his face, Adriana pulled his mouth to hers. Eric sighed, maybe in relief or pleasure, maybe both, but he kissed her back fervently. It was like every tether he'd been holding on himself snapped. He leaned into her, holding her steady as his hands held her in place while his mouth moved quickly against hers, swallowing her moan when he bit her lip. His mouth was hot against the skin of her jaw and neck, her own breath loud in her ears. Gods, she hadn't felt this in too long. Annie. His whisper of her name was like a plea, a question he'd been ignoring for countless weeks while he gave her time, sacrificed his own needs or desires for her, always for her. Annie, I need to hear you say it. Adriana brushed his wavy hair out of his eyes, already messy from running her hands through it. Yes. Her voice was hushed and higher than usual. Always, yes. Eric kissed her once firmly before taking her in his arms, much to her surprise, and carrying her to their room. She squealed at the tickling sensation of his mouth against her neck and he hushed her with a short laugh. Don't wake up the baby or we'll have to cut our fun short. I guess we'll have to be fast if that happens. Adriana said with a roguish grin that made his eyes flare. Sometimes Annie, he said, laying her down on the bed and hovering over her. I wonder if you're a lot more like Finn than you realize, what with that naughty mouth. He ran a finger across her lips and she kissed it gently. I don't hear you complaining. Quite the opposite, Eric smirked. I don't shy away from a challenge. Adriana choked, ignoring the way he pulled off her boots and threw them over his shoulder with reckless abandon. Now who's being naughty? Sure, Eric whispered, leaning over her and filling her view with blonde hair and teal eyes. Try to be quiet. Oh, I can't tell if you want Darren to wake up or not. Adriana moaned, running his hands up his back as he mouthed her neck. So you can take your sweet time or go for a sprint. Eric snapped back, eyes wide. Annie. You started it. This is a very serious situation here. Oh yes, Adriana nodded, donning an air of pompousness reserved only for the oldest of councilmen. Very serious indeed. Why, if I didn't know any better, you'd think. You know, it's really hard to get in the mood if you don't stop talking. Adriana slapped his waist, ignoring his grin. Oh, get off of me, you've lost your chance now. She managed to wriggle out of his grasp but didn't make it far before his arms banded around her waist and pulled her flush against him. And just where do you think you're going? I'm going to check on my son, if it's all the same to you. Let him sleep. We've got more important matters to attend to. If you make one more joke, her words choked off in a shriek when he dug his fingers into the soft parts of her waist. She thrashed and twisted, trying to escape his probing fingers, but Eric was too fast, pulling her down and tickling more fiercely. Soon her shrieks were rising in volume and filling the house. Stop screaming. Eric hissed through his own laughter. You'll wake the baby. Stop, please. Adriana wailed. Finally he relented, both of them panting and gasping with laughter. He leaned over her and propped his head on his elbow. You're really loud, Annie. And you're supremely evil, Adriana said, pausing in the silence to listen. Nothing sounded from the other room. Seriously. I know, Eric said, fiddling with the material of her shirt. Lead by example, right? Adriana raised a brow and sat up. She turned and straddled his hips, pressing him back down when he tried to sit up in surprise. Something like that. The first touch of her lips on his was warm and inviting, soft and gentle, like it always had been, like that very first one they'd shared under the mistletoe. Only now one of his hands slid up her leg to cup her thigh while the other plunged deep in her hair as he deepened the kiss. Soon everything felt hot and she could barely remember anything past his hands and mouth. Then he sat up and he was pulling her shirt up over her head, touching the skin of her torso as if for the first time, looking at her with such reverence as if she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Don't take this the wrong way, Eric said, voice low and rough as he pressed her back so he was on top of her. But I'm so glad you're not pregnant anymore. Adriana moaned as he kissed her again and again and again. He had a point. In the past they had to work around her pregnant belly, both something they treasured as something special and, well, perhaps a little bit of a hindrance. They'd had to be careful. But now, with his body flush against hers with nothing between them, it was quite possibly one of the most wonderful things she'd ever experienced. It was ecstasy in the best way, the purest form of torture she'd ever known, and nothing else could best it. And she was thankful that she got to have this moment with him, her best friend through many dangers and fears and turmoils, who would do anything for her and their son. Who'd given up so much to protect them when life had been so uncertain. When she thought she'd had no one to turn to, Eric had been there. Always and forever. No matter what life threw at them next, they'd handle it together, as a team. As a family. Stronger together, never apart. They'd be unstoppable, like a pair of shooting stars in the night whose light would never stop shining. The constant drip of condensation in the cave had originally been a nuisance, but now it seemed to be one of nature's simpler forms of music. A way to pass the time, to dull the silence. The steady stream of water dripping off stalactites was soothing in a way. Constant, reliable, that steady force of nature. Unlike so many things in this rotten world, at least water was reliable. But it was because of the water dripping off the stalactites that pierced the roof like stone-bound icicles that created the mightier force, the stalagmites below. Each seemingly casual drip of water made little difference in its passage from the ceiling to the ground, but in time, the mighty force of nature that was created as a result of nature's patience and resilience and unbending will was extravagant. This was what Brandine told himself in the days following the convocation. The rug had been pulled out from under him. He'd gotten cocky, arrogant, and hadn't planned to be foiled. He couldn't read minds. How was he to know that Hiccup had figured out his secret? No, not figured it out. His plan would have been achieved flawlessly if it wasn't for his mother. A ripple of anger sliced through him, so strong that the grip of the dagger in his hand creaked. He let out a slow breath, willing himself to calm. His mother had always been weak. She'd been taken advantage of her entire life. She'd never been wanted or loved by anyone. In her guilt, of course she'd told Hiccup his secret. Of course, she'd fallen in love with Burke. He glared at the map of the archipelago posted on the stone wall, the massive island of Burke that he hated so much. As far as he was concerned, she'd made herself his enemy the moment she'd given up his heritage. That had been his secret to reveal. And it had been foiled months before his knowledge, sparing Adriana, giving the Haddocks time to plot their counter-moves, giving Hiccup all the time he needed to speak to the other chieftains to rally against him. This was all his mother's fault. Still, he couldn't bring himself to have her killed for her crimes. Dager would have done it with no question. His father was not a man of mercy. He would have killed Lofen within minutes of discovering her betrayal, the depths she was willing to descend to have a better life. Didn't she realize that he'd done all of this for her? To provide for her a better life? No, of course she didn't. She was just a stupid slave. Well, Burke could have her. Hiccup and all his precious family could keep Lofen and rot together as a precious family. All of them, except one. The scrape of boots on stone sounded down the corridor. It was a few minutes before the individuals arrived. Kale and Donna saluted with their fists over their heart before lowering them. "We've returned with what you asked for." Brandine flicked his eyes to Donna, who perched on the edge of his desk. He wasn't in the mood for her coy games, but she provided the right amount of stress relief when needed. Still, despite her disobedience, getting herself banished from Burke instead of staying there as a spy, had its benefits. She wasn't trained as a spy for nothing. She'd always been light on her feet, stealthy. And if she ever got caught, she fought with the tenacity of a feral cat. Her claws went deep and true, and she didn't quit until her enemy lay dead at her feet. Noting his silence, Kale reached into his flight suit and pulled out a document. Brandine snatched it up and read it quickly. More numbers, more money, more this and that. He fought against another flicker of irritation. Stalactites and stalagmites. Drip by drip, day by day. Brandine slapped the paper down. Anything else? Yes, Donna said with a small twist of her lips. I have for you, a name. His interest sharpened. He swiveled to Donna, hating the way her eyes flared with victory that she'd successfully gained his attention at last, and drew out his curiosity as long as possible by dangling the information over his head, forcing him to ask, to bend to her will. Brandine leveled a glare at her. He bowed for no one and took orders from no one. Donna was useful, but if she thought for 1 second that he'd allow her to play this game. She must have noticed his pulsing anger because she straightened, the amusement replaced with professionalism at once. Your son's name is Darin. Darin. His son. So it's true then, Brandine said at last. She really did have a boy. Cale rolled his eyes from where he'd leaned against the wall. I'm not so sure what that has to do with anything, considering we're hiding out in a cave. It has to do with everything. Brandine said, not willing to have this conversation with them again. He didn't have to explain his motives or reasons or decisions. Their job was to accrue information and do what they were told. Stalactites and stalagmites. Their finite minds couldn't comprehend the bigger picture. It would take time to rebuild, to pull some strings here, to cut ties there. To build strong allies and eliminate foes. But day by day, drip by drip, he would rebuild his empire. He would reclaim what was rightfully his. And one day, he would watch Burke burn to the ground. Flipping the dagger in his hand, Brandine spun and hurled it at the map with every piece of anger and rage burning in his soul. It plunged 2 inches deep into the stone wall over the island of Burke, resting peacefully in an ocean full of enemies. Gather the men. Brandine hissed. We have work to do. This is Burke. From our families to our friendships, relationships are the most important aspect of our lives here. We love each other unconditionally, whether related by blood or not, and we respect even those we may not personally like because it is the right thing to do. But love isn't an emotion. It's not the blissful feelings of romance or the admiration of someone we respect. It is the constant decision we make every single day to put others' needs above our own and fight for those who cannot fight their own battles. Love is a choice. Choosing to love is the best thing we can do for one another, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. No one is perfect, and it is because no one is perfect that we must love each other even more. The greatest blessings in life come from our love for each other, even through all the hiccups along the way. The end.